Chapter 1320. Then he stretched out his hand and hit the pigeon with a stone. He caught the pigeon that fell into his palm and saw the words on the red ribbon. It was Wei Wei Bai's. It was an address. The address of the demon sect's headquarters. His Wei Wei had also learned how to do things in such a roundabout manner. She had re-established the demon sect by herself. This kind of power and strength. It shouldn't be her. No trace of Snow had all kinds of doubts in his heart, but because she was alive, he felt that it was not important. Now that he thought about it, he felt that she really had the ability to charm people. After all, many of those in the demon sect were lone wolves. They would rather die than lower their heads and be controlled by others. He turned around and walked towards the address of the demon sect. The words on the ribbon, and the following line of words. No trace of Snow, I want you to marry me openly again in a sedan chair carried by 8 people. It was still the thoughts of a little girl. She liked these ceremonies so much? No trace of Snow smiled faintly, with indescribable gentleness and affection. He didn't just stop at 8 sedan chairs. He wanted to announce to the world that he would marry her in a way that all women in the world would be envious of. He didn't know how long he could live even if he desperately suppressed his feelings. The number of times he was aroused was still frequent. The sharp pain in his chest, even if it was suppressed by her blood. It was still very painful. No trace of Snow knew that as time passed, this sharp pain would become more and more obvious. Maybe one day her blood would no longer work. So his life would not be long. No trace of Snow thought that before he died, he would use this Jianghu to win a few happy laughs from her. It was also good. The demon sect's mountain was outside the city, and the righteous sects had suffered heavy losses, so they didn't dare to provoke the demon sect anymore. And today, the demon sect seemed to be holding some kind of happy event. The word, happy, was posted everywhere, and the people of the demon sect were all jubilant. They gave red packets to people and asked them to attend the wedding of their saintess. The righteous people also heard that Wei Wei Bai was going to get married. And the wedding was going to be especially luxurious. They spat and cursed her as a demoness. But when he thought of no trace of Snow, he didn't dare to say anything. They were afraid that the Devil League leader, who had betrayed the pugilistic world, would come and kill them. No trace of Snow was bewitched by the witch of the devil cult and massacred the righteous sects of the Walin. Everyone knew about it. Now, anyone who mentioned no trace of Snow would be scared to death. After all, that massacre was simply too frightening. No matter how bad the reputation of the demonic sect was, many people still gathered on the wedding day. There were many villains from the evil path, and very few of the righteous path had come, and most of them were in disguise. After all, he had to spy on the enemy. Outside the main hall of the devil cult was a flat stone square. On the way up the mountain, the sound of gongs and drums filled the air. At first, people thought it was normal. They all wanted to see who the man who married Wei Wei Bai was. He saw dozens of people carrying countless gold, silver, and jewels and placing them on the square, followed by silk and satin. Then, there were all kinds of precious treasures and manuals. Along the way, the flowers drifted in the wind. It was simply a celestial atmosphere. In the end, 8 people slowly carried the sedan chair to the square. In front of the sedan chair, a man in a red bridegroom's suit was sitting on a brown horse. His silver hair was tied up with a jade crown. There was a gentle smile on his handsome face, and his eyes were gentle. Being looked at by him seemed to be cherished. It was no trace of Snow. Many people were not surprised. After all, everyone knew that no trace of Snow was bewitched by Wei Wei Bai and betrayed the righteous path of the Walin. But more people suddenly realized that he was going to marry the saintess of the devil cult. He was the one who betrayed her. Chapter 1321. No trace of Snow had a smile at the corner of his mouth. Without the murderous aura he had when he killed people, his every move was elegant and indifferent. Peerless, and magnificent. Feeling was the best way to describe this man. He rode his horse to the front of the square and saw Wei Wei Bai in a red wedding dress, holding a veil in her hand. She was wearing a red wedding dress that dragged on the ground, and there was a delicate rose in her hair. The bright red flower complemented her red lips and snow-white skin. She was breathtakingly beautiful. She stood quietly in the corridor, looking at no trace of Snow, smiling sweetly. No trace of Snow looked at her in a daze, as if he had returned to the day of their wedding. She was wearing a red wedding dress. At that time, she was also so beautiful. But with one strike of his sword, no trace of Snow suppressed the image that he couldn't bear. He dismounted his horse, and his red robe fluttered. Then he stood by the bridal sedan chair, waiting for her to come. He actually wanted to rush over, carry her, and leave. But he was afraid of being rude to her. He wanted to make up for his regret and carry out the wedding rules. As if this was the only way to make up for the huge mistake. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were like chopping onions, her lips were red, and the red wedding dress was covered with a veil. When she walked, she was so beautiful that it was like floating in the clouds. She was more beautiful than ever. No trace of Snow suddenly couldn't control himself. He walked forward step by step, wanting to get to her side faster. But before he could take 3 steps, the knocking sounds were heard again. He frowned and turned back to look. But he saw 4 men going up the mountain. There was a bridge of flowers, betrothal gifts, and all kinds of rare treasures. And the 4 men were all in high spirits and extraordinarily handsome. What made no trace of Snow stop was not how outstanding they were, but they were all wearing bridal clothes. No trace of Snow even recognized that one of the men was the heir of a century-old family. He was rich and was known as the little god of wealth. Another was a prince who held military power in his hands. The remaining 2 were very skilled in martial arts. Their reputation was also very well known in Jianghu. These 4 men had different personalities. Although they were all handsome, the way they were beautiful was different. It was like the different kinds of flowers in the garden. They were beautiful in different shapes. The 4 men carried 4 bridal sedan chairs to the quarry. They saw Shui Wuhan. The prince teased, "There's actually a new person? Seriously, Wei Wei has captured the heart of another alliance master." The little god of wealth also sighed helplessly. She likes to collect men's hearts. It seems that we have to squeeze together again. Although he said was sighing, there was pampering. Why did she get another wild man? Could it be that she wants to get 10 or 20 men in the future? There was unspeakable jealousy, but there was also love. No trace of Snow's smile gradually disappeared. His eyes were like ice beads, calm to cold. He looked at the 4 men, then turned to look at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai walked over from the corridor. Her red clothes were bright, and her appearance was charming and innocent. But her eyes were unusually bright and cunning. It was as if the lively Wei Wei of the past had returned. The bells on her ankles seemed to be able to enchant people as they jingled. No trace of Snow's face was covered with a layer of frost as he watched her walk towards him. Until she came in front of him, her smooth jade-like face revealed a beautiful smile. Then no trace of Snow saw her red lips slightly open as she gently said, "Wu Hen, these are your 4 brothers. As the last one to enter the sect, you should serve them tea first." No trace of Snow, // fast. Chapter 1322. The wind blew coldly across the mountain. The red she character was blown away by the wind. No trace of Snow's expression was indifferent. His delicate face had traces of gloominess. He said softly, "Wei Wei Bai, is this a unique wedding gift?" It did seem like something she would do, to get a bunch of people to tease him. Wei Wei Bai tilted her head. Her clear and moving eyes looked at him with a smile. "No trace of Snow, didn't you say that you love me?" No trace of Snow's deep and cold eyes surged with a complicated and dark emotion. His voice was light and gentle. "I love you, yes." He admitted it so simply and peacefully. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched the Chinese rose beside her hair. Her smile suddenly changed. She frowned and said impatiently, "If you love me, why can't you bear to share me with others? Don't you love me so much that you can die? Can't you be deserted by everyone? It's such a small matter, but you're being so sentimental." Her voice was delicate and charming, but the words she said were so willful that it hurt his heart. Her eyes were filled with annoyance. "All right, do you still want to go through the wedding ceremony?" I originally planned to collect a few more men. It would be best if I could collect 7 and add me to 8. That would be an auspicious number, but I couldn't find any good men. I can only continue to look after the wedding. No trace of snow said indifferently, after the wedding, continue to look? Wei Wei Bai looked at the sky. The sun was shining brightly. She gently and elegantly raised her hand. The little god of wealth immediately rushed over and placed a chair behind her. Then he gently held her hand and helped her to sit on the chair. The prince immediately rushed over to hold an umbrella and whispered, "Damn the sun today, it actually made you frown." The other 2 men also slowly came to her side. Although they were all wearing the same groom's robes, each was handsome in his own way. No trace of snow was standing opposite her. His expression was cold as he watched Wei Wei Bai enjoy the service of others without any awkwardness. She casually looked up. Her eyes were clear and flirtatious. Her innocence was gone, replaced by a mature charm. It was just like the vicious little girl in his heart who had died for him alone. He grew up overnight. She understood men and knew how to manipulate people's hearts. It was so dazzling that it made people admire it, but it also made people hate it to the bone. In Shui Wuhan's calm eyes, there was only darkness and malice. It was so cold that it could penetrate one's soul. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice the displeasure in his eyes. No, she didn't care at all. She was capricious and said in a crafty tone, "A pile of wood. I'm thirsty." One of the men, who was extremely skilled in Qigong, immediately brought some water from a distance. He squatted down and held the cup to feed her. The system said, "Wake up, host. You should know when to stop. If you go too far, you'll be sent to the crematorium in a month's time." None of these 4 men were good people. All of them had committed heinous crimes and were full of evil. Don't be fooled by the god of wealth or prince. Their hands were stained with blood. Anyway, their hearts were so vicious that they could poison a poisonous snake to death. So when they woke up in a month's time and thought of the humiliation today, the host would probably be ground to dust. Wei Wei Bai gracefully lowered her head and held the cup in her mouth. She took a sip. Her red lips were strangely beautiful. Then she casually raised her head and touched her bracelet. It was a gift from the little god of wealth. "Wu Hen, the auspicious hour is almost over. Are you going to perform the ceremony?" Her tone was very casual, as if it didn't matter if he didn't perform the ceremony. She loved him so much that she would rather die. It became blurry. All that was left was the cruel her in front of him. It was so vivid. The full articles, the downloads, the comma. Chapter 1323. No trace of snow lowered his eyes, and his lips curled into a smile. "Wei Wei Bai, is this to take revenge on me?" He emphasized the last 3 words. Although he was disappointed that she still hated him, he never thought that she would humiliate him like this. This humiliation made him feel bad, but it was not to the extent that he would fly into a rage. He had always been used to enduring silently and knew that he had gone overboard, so it was only right for her to take revenge on him. Who asked him to do the wrong thing? Bai Weiwei was stunned. She suddenly reached out and covered her mouth in surprise. "Retaliate against you? How could I retaliate against you? You're one of my favorite men. I just asked you to serve me tea. Is this retaliating against you?" These words were unreasonable and preposterous. However, she did not seem to be joking at all. "Haven't you already fallen in love with me?" No trace of Snow's dark eyes had a kind of desolate calmness. His smile was a little creepy. "Fall in love with you? Do the 4 men beside you also fall in love with you?" He did not want to deceive himself. This was not his character. He had always been intelligent and had the ability to see through people's hearts. The infatuation and love in the eyes of the 4 men was not fake. If they were really acting, they would not be so natural and humble. And Weiwei Bai did not have any ability to make these 4 men bow their heads and be a clown for her just to take revenge on him. Weiwei Bai smiled, and it was indescribably cute. "What do you think?" The 4 men immediately nodded. "Yes, of course we love you," they said in unison, full of tacit understanding. Weiwei Bai spread her hands and said with some distress, "After all, you came later. I worked hard to gather them." It is my hobby to win men's hearts. Speaking of this, her smile became a little evil, and her eyes were sparkling. She reached out and gently tugged at the corner of No Trace of Snow's clothes. Her voice was sweet and soft. Just like Master's hobby, don't you like to see those pure people completely break down and go crazy? I'm trying my best to please you according to Master's hobby. No Trace of Snow's pupils shrank. His breathing stopped, and an intense pain suddenly surged out from his chest. He suddenly wanted to cover her mouth and stop her from continuing. He felt that what she was going to say next was extremely cruel. However, Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, "Master is really hard to please. I tried so hard to act cute, but you still stabbed me to death. If I wasn't the successor of the demonic sex Saintess and know some evil spells to save my life, I would have really died." The dark abyss in No Trace of Snow's chest grew bigger and bigger. With his intelligence, how could he not hear the smugness in her voice as well as the cold mockery? There was no love. He didn't see anything at all. She reached out and took the Chinese roses from her hair. She held the flowers in her hand lazily, propping up her chin as she looked at him. "I guess I can be considered to have hit it off with my master. We both have some quirks. Master likes to see others fall into despair, while I like to win the hearts of outstanding men. They are my spoils of war, and so is Master." When she said this, she revealed a mischievous smile. "Hateful and cute. I don't like Master that much, but to win your love, I still try my best to pretend to be around you." Wei Wei Bai smiled victoriously, full of a woman's evil appearance. But it was still beautiful enough to steal one's heart. "Seeing you betray everyone for me and marry me personally, I know that Master must love me deeply. If you love me, you should be able to share me with others." Chapter 1324. Her words were bold and presumptuous. But she was as gorgeous as a flame. Willful and irresponsible beauty. Her beauty was wanton and flamboyant. She was reborn. Her every move lost its naivety and vicious straightforwardness. That vicious heart was scarier than any woman's. No Trace of Snow's breathing stopped. The sharp pain in his chest made him more awake. He could even think about how she looked when she appeared. How she fell in love with him. How she died. And her saying that she didn't love him just to get his heart was as vicious as a game. So it was just a game? It was just like how when he saw her, it was just to play a game. That was why he brought her along. It was just to see her love him and then be abandoned by him. He didn't think too much about it at first, but now that he thought about it carefully, there were indeed many unnatural things. She loved him, too quickly, too decisively. She hated him too quickly and fiercely. There was no preparation, no transition buffer. It was just straightforward. Whether it was hate or love, it was just as fast and straightforward. In fact, if he thought about it carefully, this shouldn't be a natural reaction. It was more like an act. It wasn't that there were no flaws, but that he thought that everything was in his hands. He thought that her personality was childlike, crazy, and naive, which was why she was like this. But what if she wasn't a child, and her naivety was just an act? Then her love was just a game. Naturally, he deduced it. From the beginning to the end, when he was playing the game. She was also playing. She was even more skilled than him, more ruthless than him, and more vicious to herself. One thought after another, in Wei Wei Bai's mocking and smug gaze, turned into a terrifying blade. Every blade cut his heart. Blood flowed out, filled with hatred. The humiliation of being teased was actually not as painful as the hatred of holding someone else's hand and saying that he was just a chess piece in her game. How could she not love him? How could she play with him? How could she use such a naive and vicious attitude to tell him that her love for him was nothing more than a pretense? Unwillingness, jealousy, resentment, and madness twisted into a huge whirlpool. No Trace of Snow's eyes were terrifyingly dark. His fingers slowly bent, and the red hairband shattered inch by inch. His silver hair fluttered behind his back. For a moment he looked gloomy and cold. He was like a demon god that made people tremble. "Are you happy? When I fell in love with you, were you happy?" He spoke softly, his eyes fixed on her. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have sensed danger. She frowned in annoyance and then sat up straight. No trace of snow, it's just a game. Why are you so agitated? Didn't you have a good time too? Although I had a lot of fun playing this game, I also put in a lot of effort. No trace of snow looked at her expressionlessly. He suddenly felt that she was still too naive. Or rather, he was not smart enough. Otherwise, how could he destroy his heart like this? Even if it was just a lie to appease him, it would be fine. Wei Wei Bai impatiently pinched the Chinese rose and threw it at No Trace of Snow's feet. Alright, don't look like you can't afford to play. Aren't you a hypocrite? How many people have you harmed? I thought that people like you would be more open when playing. She said this and gave him a look of disdain. In the end, you can't afford to play. But love, do you really want to maintain love for a lifetime? Can't you just get a moment of happiness? Chapter 1325. Wei Wei Bai said this and became unhappy. Forget it. Today was supposed to be a happy day, but you ruined it. If you don't want to be my little five, I won't bother you. You can leave. She sent him away. It was a simple sentence. A disdainful and impatient attitude. She was really vicious and direct. She didn't have a trace of kindness. She took it for granted and was fearless. No Trace of Snow knew that she didn't have a good temperament, but he didn't expect her to be so cold. She could even play with feelings. How could she play with feelings? Playing with feelings, was she so confident that she wouldn't make a mistake? No Trace of Snow looked at the men behind her. They were all outstanding and had different personalities and appearances. It seemed that her taste in men was so fickle. She liked the new and hated the old. They were so outstanding. And her methods were indeed good. She even captured his heart. How could others compare to him? Once he fell in love, it would be fatal. He couldn't fall in love with others, but he was completely trapped by her. It was easier for others. She had indeed never made a mistake before. She was better than him. He made a mistake once and lost to her. So it was all a scam. A faint sigh echoed in his heart. That sigh turned into thousands of swords, cutting his flesh and breaking his bones, dismembering him into pieces. No Trace of Snow's face was a little pale. He thought that he only had a few days left to live, so he just had to pamper her. She wanted the sky, the earth, and the stars. He would listen to her. Stirring up a storm of blood to win her good mood for a day was something he was willing to do. He thought again, if she really liked men's hearts so much. He could be little five and make her happy. He could be little five as long as the first four died. The pain in No Trace of Snow's chest had already exceeded the limits of what a human could bear. But he still looked calm. He reached out and gently held her fingers. His voice trembled, but in the end he softened his temper. Okay, are you really going to be angry with me? You're just making me angry. It was the final struggle, the desolation of dying. Wei Wei Bai slapped his hand away. She stood up and looked at him coldly. You're so annoying. You were more fun in the beginning. I don't like you now. After saying that, she turned around without hesitation. No, I'm not in a good mood today. The four of you can come and marry me tomorrow. The other four men wailed at the same time. Wei Wei, you're really tormenting us to death when you play games. Wei Wei Bai glared back fiercely and said, if you don't like it, then get lost. Who cares about you? It's just a game. I have plenty of men who can play it. The rest of the men immediately surrendered. All right, we'll get married tomorrow. I guarantee you'll be happy. Only then did Bai Wei Wei reveal a smile, then she turned and left. The long red wedding dress dragged on the ground, and it was the same gorgeous color as her. Bai Wei Wei walked with her head held high and said, Queen, I am a proper queen. You should have let me capture such a good plane long ago. All men are just ants, they have to kneel and call me daddy. The system held its forehead. It couldn't bear to see the host courting death to this extent. Did you know? The male main plane's martial strength is number 1. Wei Wei Bai smiled innocently. Didn't you have a serious injury? Also, aren't those 4 masters very powerful? Even though the 4 experts were all evil people who had committed countless evil deeds, they were still alive. Their martial arts were indeed very high. The system was silent, then said, Number 1 in martial strength means that if everyone in this plane worked together to go against him, they would all be killed by him. The download address is at https://www. Sashu. Chapter 1326. Wei Weibai thought that the strongest in martial arts was a few masters who could kill no trace of snow. However, the strongest in martial arts was the child of the realm. That was literally what it meant. That was fucking it. He was really number 1. The number 1 that no one could kill. No matter how many masters came together, they would not be able to defeat no trace of snow in a few moves. Wei Weibai's footsteps became heavy. You're saying, the system said, if he wants to kill someone, all the masters in the demonic sect combined would not be enough to kill him alone. Wei Weibai's mouth twitched. How much is the heartbreak value? The system was in despair. Oh my god, the heartbreak value was a publicly recognized number that could not increase wildly. Because the pain of the heartbreak value increasing by 1 point was real desperation. In the end, no trace of Snow's heartbreak value actually increased by tens of points. This was simply killing. Wei Weibai said, actually, I wanted to show off a little and let no trace of Snow suffer for a while to increase the heartbreak value. Then, I'll chase him down the mountain and use the tender heart strategy next time. The system said, chase him down the mountain. The idea was good, but how to chase no trace of Snow down the mountain? As for the tender heart strategy, did the host have any ambiguity about the word tender heart? What tender heart when he was already tortured to this extent? Wei Weibai seemed to know the system's doubts. She muttered, I thought that with so many masters in the demonic sect, and 4 of them, there shouldn't be a big problem. Plus, no trace of Snow had hurt himself because of his emotions. So to chase him away, it should be very easy. Screams suddenly sounded. Wei Weibai and the system trembled at the same time. They stiffened their necks and looked behind them. Then they saw a terrifying scene. A shocking wave of inner energy, like a colorless and invisible terrifying blade, spread rapidly with no trace of Snow as the center. The person standing next to him was killed in an instant. The expressions of the hypnotized evil men beside Wei Weibai changed as they drew their weapons at the same time. However, no trace of Snow acted as if he did not see them. His silver hair fluttered behind him, his posture was tall and elegant, and his red robes fluttered in the wind. Like fire, like the coldest fireworks. She was astonishingly beautiful, yet cold and cruel. He held a long sword in his hand. His eyelashes were drooping and his eyes were dark. His eyes were fixed on Wei Weibai. Then, step by step, he slowly walked towards Wei Weibai. There was even a smile at the corner of his mouth. His handsome face was as dazzling as the sun, but his deep and dark eyes carried with them a crazy and twisted evil aura. Like an immortal or a demon. It was both good and evil. But in the same person, it was so contradictory that it was breathtaking. Wei Weibai and the system trembled at the same time. Fuck, why can't anyone escape from him? The system said, number 1 in the world. The 4 great evil men were killed by him. He killed the 4 great evil men with just 3 slashes. The system said, I said number 1 in the world, so it means number 1 in the world. This number 1 was not discounted at all. Did Wei Weibai think that it was the system that gave the reward? No trace of Snow was the child of the plane. All of his luck and blessings were hardcore and unshakable. It was not something that the system could compare to the host. Wei Weibai said, I'll run first. The system reached out its hand, wanting her to wait for death in peace, but felt that it was too cruel. It could only say, then run, live for a few more seconds. You can torture me, but you can't torture me like this. She directly tortured no trace of Snow to insanity, and no one could withstand it. Wei Weibai lifted her skirt and ran forward. She said as she ran, Can't I show off? I just showed off for a few minutes, and now I'm a coward. The system said earnestly, Young people, you have to be careful when you show off. Don't do this in the future. Wei Weibai slowed down. She could not run anymore. Because someone had stepped on her skirt. Tongzi, I feel that I don't have a future. The system turned around and then silently turned around. Go in peace. The person who stepped on her skirt gently placed a pale and slender hand on her thin shoulder. His hand was very cold. She could feel the cold temperature of his fingers through her clothes. Wei Weibai took a deep breath. She had seen ghosts before. Why would she be afraid of seeing ghosts? Just as she was about to turn around, a familiar embrace had already pressed against her back and held onto her waist. His lips had already sucked on her sensitive ear. Wei Weibai. His voice was cold and hoarse. Wei Weibai's body stiffened. She felt his teeth biting her ear, and then a cold laugh filled with hostility rang out. Aren't you going to get married? I'm willing to be your Xiaowu, but unfortunately, I've killed all your other men. Wei Weibai. It felt good to show off, but the one-stop service at the crematorium was even better. Chapter 1327. Wei Weibai sat on the edge of the bed with a red veil over her head. She complained to the system, "Is no trace of Snow planning to rape me before killing me?" She couldn't move. Her acupuncture points were sealed and she was forced to sit there. The red veil blocked her vision, making it impossible for her to see her surroundings. No trace of Snow's light body technique was also very good. His footsteps were silent, so she couldn't hear what he was doing when he came and went. The system hesitated. He's sitting. Wei Weibai, sitting where? The system, opposite you. You're sitting on the bed, and he's sitting on the chair opposite you. He's staring at you without blinking. His eyes are bloodshot and there's a long sword on his knees. He's wiping it off slowly. The murderous aura around him is so strong that it's hard to breathe. He looks like he wants to kill someone or kill someone. Anyway, he's looking at you with murderous eyes. Stop, 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 stop. You're talking so fast. Are you writing a novel? Wei Weibai couldn't take it anymore. No trace of Snow was holding a sword, sitting opposite her, and looking at her with murderous eyes. What a simple and neat summary. Why did he have to be so long-winded? But thinking about it this way, being long-winded and neat were both equally scary. No trace of Snow was probably too agitated. His mind was now filled with thoughts of how to torture her. Thinking about how she was courting death, there was no way out at all. Wei Weibai sighed. She forgot to increase his favorability after grinding her heart. Who asked Xue Wuhan to be so tormented? She only cared about torturing him to death. She forgot that she still had to grind his favorability. No trace of Snow probably wouldn't increase his favorability now. She had said it herself. This was a game. Who would have a favorable impression of a game? One shouldn't be too cocky. Once it was over, it would really be over. Wei Weibai sat there stiffly for a long time. She couldn't speak and couldn't move her limbs. Her muscles were numb, as if her blood circulation was not good. After all, sealing her acupuncture points could hinder the speed of blood flow or something. Wei Weibai talked nonsense to the system. Say, if I lose my memory again and become a little white rabbit or retard, will no trace of Snow take pity on me? The system said, don't make up old stories, I beg you. If you're tired of the innocent and naive ones, then use the retarded ones. If you were the main character of the novel, you'd be whipped to death by the readers. By Wei Wei, isn't it because I can't help it? Now that we've reached this stage, we won't rest until we're dead. If we don't start from scratch, we won't be able to increase our favorability. The system said, I told you not to be so arrogant, but you just had to go to the point of no return. By Wei Wei, I have a detailed plan. The system, what's the plan? Wei Weibai said, no trace of Snow was caught by my master. I'll tie him up and whip him every day. I'll give him a treat once in a while, then continue to torture him physically and mentally. I'll whip him 3 times a day, then I'll treat him better. He'll definitely have Stockholm Syndrome in the future. Then the favorability points will be full, and so will the torture points. The system quickly dug its ears. Wait, don't say a bunch of delusional words. How did you come up with this stupid plan? Wei Weibai said, everyone does that. The system was confused. Which everyone? Wei Weibai said, protagonists of torture novels are all like that. Torture the heart, torture the lungs, and dig out the uterus and dig out the kidneys. In the end, we'll have a happy new year. The system. Reading novels really lowers your IQ. You should read more textbooks next time. Study hard so that you can get beaten up every day. TUI, improve every day. The Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. // to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Comma. Chapter 1328. No trace of snow did not move or make a sound. Wei Wei Bai also did not move or make a sound. She chatted with the system until the latter half of the night. She could not help but lower her eyes tiredly and fall asleep. After all, she had seen so many cruel scenes. She was used to resting quickly in a harsh environment to regain her energy. Just as she was about to fall asleep, the red veil on her head was suddenly pulled away. The candlelight flickered. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes wide with tears in her eyes. Her lips were red, and her pink face had traces of innocent enchantment. She was wearing a red wedding dress and was as beautiful as a delicate porcelain doll. No trace of Snow's face was still pale. He had already changed into his groom's clothes. He was wearing a clean white robe and his silver hair was tied up, revealing his full forehead and a pair of deep and beautiful eyes. He did not expect that his groom's clothes would be stained with blood, so he did not have a change of clothes. He could only wear his own clothes. They were white like morning clothes. He lowered his eyes to look at her, then gently reached out his hand to hold her face. His voice was soft and empty, with a kind of strange gentleness. Wei Wei, I just thought about it and feel that you are cuter when you are alive. Wei Wei Bai saw a gloomy murderous intent in his eyes. She always felt that when he said that she was cute, he was actually going to break her neck. He revealed a smile. So during this period of time, I will have to trouble you to accompany me. During this period of time before he died, the pain of love would madly devour his body. Even the best martial arts in the world could not stop the speed of death. When he was wiping his sword just now, he was actually suppressing the violent and painful murderous intent in his heart. He wanted to kill her, because she made him feel humiliated and embarrassed. Of course, most of it was the fear of her abandoning him. No trace of Snow, who had played games for half of his life, was always in a high position and at ease. But she pulled him down from the altar and stepped on him wantonly. There had never been a woman who could tease and deceive him like this. No trace of Snow accepted his loss wholeheartedly. Therefore, he should have killed her to regain some of his dignity. No trace of Snow gently kissed her face and saw a flash of fear in her eyes. What a cunning little fox to be afraid of him. Vicious and cowardly. In fact, she didn't have a heart and wouldn't fall in love. He was too selfish and only knew how to love himself. No trace of Snow felt like he was looking at his former self. He was very selfish. So what if everyone in the world is dead, as long as I'm happy? It was a miracle to fall in love with Wei Wei Bai. Unfortunately, this miracle could not happen a second time. No trace of Snow coldly saw the indifference in her eyes, as well as the disdainful ridicule towards love. Well, she didn't love him. Not to mention falling in love with someone else. He kissed her lips, and a few strands of silver hair fell beside her eyes. She frowned in discomfort, but couldn't struggle because she couldn't move. No trace of Snow tenderly reached out his fingers and covered her cheeks, preventing his hair from sticking to her face. He seemed to still be that incomparably gentle teacher. Wei Wei Bai, I'll unseal your acupuncture points, and we'll drink wine. Spring nights are short. Tonight is our wedding night, and I want to leave you good memories. No trace of Snow's face was pale, but his smile was sincere. His fingers accurately hit a few of her acupuncture points. Wei Wei Bai immediately felt her blood flow smoothly. She slowly recovered and found that she could move her limbs. Chapter 1329. She immediately gasped for breath, her eyes trembling a few times, but she still forced a sweet smile. Master, you really scared me to death. She smiled as if she had forgotten the cruel words she said, The thickness of her skin was amazing. Shui Wuhan didn't expose her fake smile at all. He brought the wine over. Drink some? Wei Wei Bai tactfully brought it over. After all, it was too torturous. She was afraid that no trace of snow would go crazy and kill her directly. After all, no trace of snow sat there for so long without saying anything, just thinking about how to kill her. She knew his temperament too well. Although he did not kill her for now, if she did something out of line, he would change his mind at any time. No trace of Snow's temperament was temperamental and unpredictable. No trace of Snow also brought the wine for himself. Come, hook my arm. Wei Wei Bai obediently hooked her arm around his arm, feeling the firm and powerful muscles under his clothes. She twitched her mouth and said to the system, "No trace of Snow has calmed down?" No trace of Snow was too good at pretending. She could not understand his emotions at the moment. The system said, according to his physical condition, heartbeat, and the tension of his muscles, he is still in a state of irritation. Wei Wei Bai said, "If only I could knock him down, that would be good." No trace of Snow's current condition was too unstable. She did not dare to take the risk of teasing him too much. The system said, "There is a strong anesthetic on sale recently. 5 days of life is enough to knock down an elephant. Do you want it?" 5 days was still bearable. Wei Wei Bai immediately nodded. "Yes, put it in No Trace of Snow's wine glass." The system said, "Okay." Then it bought the lowest grade and cheapest 5 days of anesthetic and threw it into No Trace of Snow's glass. After all, even though the current situation seemed calm, it was actually just a pretense before the storm. The darkness in No Trace of Snow's eyes did not lessen at all. Therefore, he still had to restrain No Trace of Snow to give the host some time to think about what to do next. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and drank the wine quietly. When No Trace of Snow's lips touched the wine, he paused. His deep eyes flashed with a trace of anger. Then he calmly drank the wine. After the two hypocrites finished drinking, they looked at each other in silence. Wei Wei Bai was waiting for the anesthetic to take effect, so she obediently put her hands on her knees, leaned forward a little, and looked at him with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. If he could take down No Trace of Snow. She immediately bound him with 10 or 8 chains. She had gained experience from being imprisoned. It was time for her to imprison her target. She had a lot of experience, so she was very familiar with the one-stop service in the little dark room. Let No Trace of Snow enter the little dark room first, then think of a way to increase his favorability. The current No Trace of Snow had a heartbreaking value of 80, so Wei Wei Bai was very worried. No Trace of Snow sat quietly and elegantly. Then he reached for the wine bottle, poured himself another glass, and drank slowly. He looked at her strangely, as if wondering why he was fine. But she did not know that the unknown poison she put in him had already been forced out by him with his inner energy. The smell of the wine was different, and he could tell the difference with just a sniff. She was so cunning, how could he not guard against her? The system saw that Wei Wei Bai was still waiting for the anesthetic to take effect, so it could only helplessly say to her, "We miscalculated." Wei Wei Bai, ? The system said, the amount of anesthetic was too small, plus it had a smell, so the male lead noticed it. He forced most of the anesthetic out of his body, and the remaining amount was unable to do anything to him. Chapter 1330. Wei Wei Bai. Because this was the first time that the system's products had lost their effects, Wei Wei Bai was still confused. She was still very confident in the system's products. After all, this was a product that surpassed human technology. It should be impossible for humans to resist and fail. So when it failed for the first time, she did not react at all. She watched as No Trace of Snow finished speaking and drank the whole pot of wine. His face started to turn red, and his eyes lit up. Wei Wei Bai did not know if it was because she was infected by him. She also started to feel hot. She frowned slightly. Her face was as pink as a peach blossom, delicate and pure. It was really unimaginable. Her heart was actually as cold and selfish as his. No Trace of Snow finished drinking all the wine, then walked in front of her and slowly squatted down. His handsome and pale face was dyed red. pale and cold with a few traces of wilted red. It was so stunning that it seduced people's souls. Wei Wei Bai trembled and finally realized that something was wrong. The crazy heat that surged up in her body was a strong aphrodisiac. The system realized in hindsight. Host, you've been drugged. Wei Wei Bai despised the system. This was obvious without needing to be said. And she was not the only one who was drugged. No trace of Snow drank the medicine himself. They took the medicine together, ate the medicine together, and loved each other in the same bed. No trace of Snow squatted in front of Wei Wei Bai and put his hand on her soft fingers on her knee. His gentleness was like water, and the deep affection in his eyes was intoxicating. Wei Wei, do you know that there is a special kind of goo in Yaojiang? Wei Wei Bai frowned, and sweat appeared on her forehead. She forced a smile. Master, please spare me. I know you're angry, but I'm only angry that you killed me. I actually still like you, that's why I found another man to anger you. Look at her, what a clever mouth. She knew that she was in danger. He immediately changed his attitude and put away his threatening appearance. She put on a pretentious and obedient look. Her adorable appearance had captured the hearts of many men. No trace of Snow realized that he couldn't think too deeply because he didn't know how many men he had slept with. He just couldn't stand it. No trace of Snow's smile deepened. Master knows that you do like me, but this love is not unique, so let me help you. He moved his finger and a small bamboo tube appeared on his finger. So what if he liked games? He was a gamer. When a gamer was used to being high and mighty, he would not have sincere feelings for the chess pieces in the game. Her feelings were very cheap. No trace of Snow opened the bamboo tube and calmly explained, the wine you're drinking is from my 1,000 days of spring. After drinking the wine, you'll be very hot. This is the perfect time to let this thing enter your body. Wei Wei Bai, hibernating spring, this name sounds a little slutty. Then she saw a black worm crawling out of the bamboo tube. Wei Wei Bai trembled. Tongzi, a worm. The system also trembled. So scary, a worm. Wei Wei Bai. The worm was extremely fast and drilled into Wei Wei Bai's fingertip in an instant. The system couldn't stop it in time. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed and immediately pinched her finger. She knew that this thing was definitely not a good thing. No trace of Snow gently looked at her futile struggle. On his finger, there was another large bug. Do you know what this is? This is the 1,000 days of spring's goo. Your goo is female and belongs to the category of goo. I'm a male and dominate you. Wei Wei Bai's expression finally darkened. No trace of Snow, what kind of goo did you put in me? Everyone knew that goo was definitely not a good thing. No trace of Snow's deep and dark eyes had a strange light. He smiled and his eyes were full of charm. Lust goo, this goo will make you beg me to love you. If you don't beg me for a day, you will die. Wei Wei Bai's eyes glazed over for a moment. Her body suddenly burned with a terrifying heat. Her lips trembled and she finally couldn't take it anymore. No trace of Snow, I'm going to kill you. No trace of Snow stretched out his hand and pushed her onto the bed. Her limbs were already limp and she was sweating. Her face was flushed and she had no strength to resist. He stretched out his hand and gently stroked her sweaty hair. Okay, you can kill me on the bed. If she couldn't focus, he forced her to focus. Because it wasn't a good habit to be half-hearted. He was her master. He had the responsibility to teach her how stupid it was to get a man's heart and then abandon him. Chapter 1331. The system reminded her, stop looking around, I'm going to be blocked again. The host's shifty-eyed look was indescribably wretched. Wei Wei Bai helplessly touched her face. Look at my face. It's too thin, although it has a melancholy beauty, the system expressionlessly interrupted. There are many black, wriggling worms in your body fighting for food, of course you'll become thin. In the future, big worms will give birth to little worms, and little worms will give birth to little worms. Crawling out of your eyes, you'll have a dense beauty. Wei Wei Bai. She suddenly felt that the oval face in the bronze mirror was a little scary. Wei Wei Bai immediately put down the bronze mirror, refusing to imagine the system's words. Then she took out a hairpin. It's not good to mess around like this every day. Lying in bed every day will make me useless. It's better to do something serious. The system said, the male lead is here. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed. She looked at the table coldly, her long hair loose, a murderous look in her eyes. She tried to take a few deep breaths, her fingers trembling. As if she was mentally prepared, she used the hairpin in her hand to stab her wrist. Before she could stab it, a white, slender finger held her wrist tightly. Then a teasing voice rang out. "What's wrong, little witch? We haven't seen each other for so long. Why are you hurting yourself the moment we meet?" His tone had a hint of suppressed nervousness, as well as anger that was about to explode. But they were all easily suppressed by him. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She looked up and found that it was no trace of Snow wearing a mask. White Magnolia. Unexpected shock. She originally wanted to pretend to commit suicide, then stab No Trace of Snow. She wanted to let him know that she was forced into a desperate situation. If he didn't give her some personal space, she would die with him. But this plan couldn't be used. After all, the secret that White Magnolia and No Trace of Snow were the same person. She hadn't exposed him yet. The hatred on Wei Wei Bai's face disappeared. She threw away the hairpin in her hand and revealed a lazy smile. "What? You can enter and leave this place as you please, but you still don't know what happened to me?" No Trace of Snow saw her smile, even if it was a smile of impatience. He continued to stare blankly for a few seconds, because he hadn't seen her smile in a while. During this time, he could only get her obedience in bed. Once she sobered up a little, she would look at him with disgust and hatred. Like him, she liked to play games. No Trace of Snow knew the character of this kind of person. Freedom was very important. What they wanted was to live a cold, selfish, and reckless life. But now, she was trapped in a cage. It would be strange if she didn't resent him for breaking her wings. She had lost a lot of weight recently, and she was also very irritated. Her condition was getting worse and worse. He knew that if this continued, she would go crazy. No Trace of Snow endured the anger of seeing her hurt herself. His voice changed completely. "I heard that you and your master became enemies, so I came to see if I could take over. After all, you used to like your master. I'd be asking for trouble if I went forward." Wei Wei Bai heard this. She couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. She pushed him away and said fiercely, "Don't pretend to be nice to this old lady. You're just here to take advantage of me when I'm in trouble. Even if I were to rot on Shui Wuhan's bed, I wouldn't let a shameful turtle like you have a chance." She was still vicious and crafty. But finally, there was a little more vitality. Chapter 1332. No Trace of Snow silently touched his mask to make sure it wouldn't fall off. He then said softly, "What's wrong? Have you become stupid after being imprisoned? You actually want to rot in the bed of the man who imprisoned you?" Wei Wei Bai leaned against the dressing table and curled a lock of black hair. She looked at him coldly. "What's your purpose? Do you think No Trace of Snow will let you go if I shout now?" No Trace of Snow was a little greedy for the willful and unruly look that finally appeared on her face. She looked better like this than her lifeless and hateful look. He couldn't help but reach out to touch her face. Without the mask, he couldn't see her like this. She hated him so much that she didn't even look at him. Wei Wei Bai's eyes hardened. She picked up the hairpin that she had just thrown away and fiercely stabbed it into his palm. No Trace of Snow flipped his hand and snatched the hairpin. He frowned. "A woman's heart is really the most poisonous. I saw that you were bored and wanted to take you out for a walk." Wei Wei Bai looked at him from head to toe and finally said with a frown, "It's been so long and you still don't have a name?" No Trace of Snow knew that she wouldn't go with someone so easily. She was very vigilant. So he was silent for a moment and then said indifferently, "I'm called by Magnolia." Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. She suddenly raised the corner of her mouth. "You're the Bai Magnolia who was framed by No Trace of Snow for killing his family?" No Trace of Snow. Yes, that hypocrite, the Wulian Alliance master, killed who knows how many people and framed them all on me. So I planned to steal his most precious thing to take revenge on him. To make her feel better. He didn't hesitate to ruin himself. Sure enough, Wei Wei Bai laughed. She laughed until she didn't have the strength to rest her head on her arm. Her ink-black hair hung loosely behind her back, and her sweet smile was enough to charm any man. No trace of snow looked down and his breathing became heavier. Wei Wei Bai casually got up. She was barefoot and the bell on her ankle jingled. She came in front of him and suddenly reached out to take off his mask. No trace of snow blocked her and didn't let her succeed. Wei Wei Bai was stunned, but she didn't take another step forward. She said, "Ugly, take me away." Without waiting for no trace of snow to say anything. She had already said, "I am the one you want, Shui Wuhan's most precious treasure." Shui Wuhan was speechless for a moment before she reached out and picked her up. Then she jumped out of the window. His qinggong was a flying of snow was. Bai Weiwei nestled in his arms and arrogantly ordered, "Hey bastard, run forward, it's very high, the scenery is good." Of snow, if it weren't for the fact that she was happy, he would have thrown her down. He carried her and ran over the high rooftops. The scenery was picturesque. She was even more beautiful. Finally, she pointed to the top of the mountain, where the sunset was beautiful. "Bastard, do you have any wine?" Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to order him around. No trace of snow silently took out a bottle of wine. She had not eaten much recently, but he forced her to eat. She couldn't eat, or perhaps she ate very little. Seeing her body getting thinner by the day and her eyes gradually losing life, the pain in his chest spread to his entire body. Even if he was going to die, he wouldn't let her have an easy time. That was why he dragged her along with him to be tortured in hell. But when he saw that she was about to break down, he couldn't bear to do it. Wei Wei Bai held the bottle of wine and didn't say anything. She sat on the mountaintop, facing the wind. Her fluttering dress was blown up by the wind. She looked at the setting sun with an expressionless face and drank the wine. No trace of snow pretended not to care. He took out the wine and planned to coax her to eat some. Chapter 1333. In the end, she suddenly said, "If I jump down from here, will no trace of snow be angry?" No trace of snow paused in his actions of placing the dishes. He raised his eyes, filled with ruthlessness and gloom. He endured it, his voice trembling slightly. "This is not like you. Aren't you the kind of vicious woman who wants to take revenge after being bullied?" Wei Wei Bai's voice was indifferent and casual. "I'm a person who holds grudges. No trace of snow, that bastard, did this to me. I even have the heart to kill him." No trace of snow suppressed the bloody taste of despair in his voice. "Then kill him. What's the point of you jumping off a cliff to take revenge on him?" Bai Weiwei shook the bottle of wine, her face slightly flushed with drunkenness. "Kill him? If only I could bear to." No trace of snow was silent for a moment. He slowly raised his head, almost unable to believe what he had heard. Wei Wei Bai's attention was not on him. She shook out the last bit of wine and slowly drank it. The wind blew through her black hair. Her eyebrows were stunning. "If I didn't know that he would die if he fell in love with me, how could I bear to humiliate him and hate him like that?" No trace of snow was stunned. His usually calm mind froze. Only her back view and her lonely words were clear as they rushed into his heart. His martial arts are good at killing people, but even better at killing himself. My blood can't save him at all. The only way is to prevent him from falling in love. When she said this, she suddenly burst into laughter. She laughed very happily. "He likes me, he loves me. I'm so happy." When Wei Wei Bai said this, she turned to look at no trace of snow, her eyes shining with happiness. "Rat, you don't know how it feels to be loved by the person you like." No trace of snow's eyes were already red, but the mask hid his complicated expression. He pursed his lips. "Humph, are you talking in your sleep? Don't you like to collect men's hearts?" Wei Wei Bai's smile changed and she snorted, "Idiot, how can you believe such rumors? Am I really the kind of woman who likes to collect outstanding men? Do I not have a place in the legends of Jianghu?" These words woke him up from his dream. No trace of snow had always felt that something was wrong, but the pain she gave him was too heavy. As a result, he did not think deeply. Indeed, if she was really that powerful, why didn't she have any reputation before? Wei Wei Bai laughed proudly. Master is so gullible. I deliberately found several men to provoke him, and he really believed me. No trace of snow was silent. Then he said, those men, aren't they all Prince's little god of wealth? If they don't like you, why, Wei Wei Bai, do I have to like them just because they like me? I don't care about other men's hearts. If it weren't for them acting, I wouldn't even see them. No trace of snow felt a sharp pain in his chest. There was even a taste of blood in his mouth, but this was different from despair. This was because of the surge of hope. The pain of falling in love again was even more intense. Wei Wei Bai was drunk. She said with a smile, if I do this, Master will not like me and abandon me. This way he can kiss her. As she spoke, her eyes were lonely, and the tears in her eyes finally appeared. But how can he do this? How can he still like me? I hurt him so deeply. The tears in her eyes fell. The grievance and sadness almost broke her. I want him to hate me. I want him to live. He can't love me. The hatred in No Trace of Snow's chest was shattered by her words. What replaced it was the pain of regret and the joy that she liked him. Wei Wei Bai wiped her tears and said while crying, I can't leave him now. He's going to die soon. How can I save him? Was it all fake? No Trace of Snow's fingers trembled as he reached out. He wanted to hug her. It turned out that those words were all fake. She was still that little disciple who liked him. Bai Weiwei suddenly turned around with incredible speed. She hugged Xue Wuhan, and while he was in a daze, she took off his mask. No trace of snow did not stop her. She loved him. It didn't matter if she found out who she was. But when the mask was removed, he saw a cold smile in her eyes. She held the mask in her hand. All the sadness and love disappeared. There was only a careless teasing. I knew it. What white magnolia? So it's you, Master? Xue Wuhan's handsome face froze in a daze for a moment. He was still stuck in the beautiful dream that she liked him. But Bai Weiwei was like a viper. She was light and cold, and her laughter was mocking. Master, I already knew that white magnolia was you. Were you satisfied with your disciple's performance? Your disciple really likes you. You just like to hear me say this, right? She slowly wrapped her body around him. Her fingers stroked the back of his neck. She said slowly, enchanting and vicious. I was just toying with you. I was toying with you from the beginning to the end. I didn't have any feelings for you at all. After saying that, a poisonous needle appeared in her hand and she stabbed it into the back of his neck. This was a fatal wound. She wanted him dead. She was resolute and cold. At the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1334. The system that originally thought that Wei Wei Bai was playing dumb to increase the favorability was so scared that the sausage in its hand broke into 2 pieces. Don't do this, the favorability is about to die. Without waiting for the system to roar. No trace of snow had already spat out a mouthful of blood, but his hand was already clamping down on the needle in her hand. Absolute strength was completely different from their martial strength. Even if Wei Wei Bai used all of her evil schemes, her body's speed was still not faster than his. The needle in her hand was taken away and her fingertips were numb. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed, but she immediately jumped away from him and ran towards the cliff. The wind was strong, making her dress look especially good when it fluttered. But the place she was standing at was a bottomless abyss. No trace of snow stood there in a daze. His knot broke out, the pain of love and resentment in his heart. Love and hate intertwined to form a terrifying power that turned the sky and earth upside down in his body. The corner of his mouth was covered in blood, and his eyes carried traces of sadness as he looked at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be as heartless as before. Her eyes were indifferent, and the corners of her mouth carried a smile as she looked at him with ridicule. I say, no trace of snow, you're too gullible. You believe me just because I say I like you, you're too narcissistic. No trace of Snow's face in the afterglow had a kind of cold sadness. He seemed to be unable to hold on as he staggered, but he still walked step by step towards Wei Wei Bai. Like a moth to a flame. She was like a heartless flame. He had always been chasing after her, but he had never moved her. Wei Wei Bai saw him coming over, so she frowned and said unhappily, "Stay away from me or else I'll jump." No trace of Snow's silver hair draped over his body. His temperament was floating, but it carried a mournful despair. He said, "You jump." Wei Wei Bai saw that he was really walking over with one foot already outside the cliff. She said provocatively, "Do you really think I don't dare to jump?" Her face had lost its innocence, but it was as beautiful as fire. Every frown and every smile was so warm that people couldn't look away. No trace of Snow looked at her with red eyes and a smile on his face, but there was a strange sense of vulnerability in his expression. "If you jump, I'll jump too." Wei Wei Bai was stunned, and the smile on her face froze. Her eyes hardened and she sneered, "I've never seen a man like you. You were fine at the beginning, but why did you fall in love with me and want to die? Can love be treated as life? You're about to lose your life. Don't you feel uncomfortable vomiting blood like this?" No trace of Snow, "I look down on you. If you're a man, you can let go. If you fall in love, you can stop loving. If you fall in love, you can suppress your feelings. Look at yourself now. You're a good-for-nothing, a coward." No trace of Snow looked at her in a daze. Suddenly, he vomited another mouthful of blood. His body couldn't take it any longer. The deeper the feelings, the stronger the martial arts backlash. He was in so much pain that he didn't want to live. He couldn't even beg for death. But he still walked over step by step. Wei Wei Bai was forced to take half a step back, and the rocks on the cliff began to fall down. His footsteps hesitated, and he was already standing in front of her. Behind him was also a bottomless abyss. There was a distance between the two of them, and they stared at each other. The system looked at them and felt that they were waiting in line to jump off the cliff. The next line would probably be, "Hello, friend, are you here to jump off the cliff too? What a coincidence, so am I." No trace of Snow's face that had lost his mask was extremely pale. His eyes were extremely deep, like a bottomless abyss, with a boundless aura of death. The blood at the corner of his mouth surged up again. Chapter 1335. The bright red blood was a ghastly sight. The strength of the crazy counterattack made his vision turn black. He felt like he was going to die. During this period of time, he let his feelings run amok. He also let his body experience the joy of complete indulgence. His body and soul completely violated the reverse scale that should not be touched. The pain in his body hissed in his bones. No trace of Snow took half a step back. The cliff was behind him. He looked at her face greedily. This might be enough. It was enough to let her go. She was such a selfish and willful person. During this period of time, she was tortured to this state by him. No trace of Snow did not think of doing more, but when she went on a hunger strike, he knew that she would not really let him die. He still found that he could not bear to. Loving a person made the armor turn into thorns and stab himself. No trace of Snow reached out his hand. Across the air, his fingertips seemed to be able to touch her cold face. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be a little vigilant. Although her face was more delicate, it had lost its full health. His fingertips moved slightly. In the end, he gave up the idea of pushing her off the cliff. The sun had set. Darkness began to spread on the mountaintop. The mountain wind began to howl and become cold. No trace of Snow looked up at the sky. There was blood in his mouth. He had never complained about the heavens or the earth. It had always been a world where the strong preyed on the weak. If he lost, so what if he died? So he did not feel guilty at all when he teased and ravaged the weak. Instead, he mocked them coldly and looked at them coldly from above. As for Bai Weiwei, it was the game where he suffered the most from his own bad karma. No trace of Snow's face in the darkness suddenly became soft and gentle. He slowly revealed a smile. Even the afterglow of the sun just now was not as beautiful as his smile. "Weiwei, I never thought that I would die so cowardly." His words were laced with the taste of blood, but his expression did not change at all. However, the flesh and blood on his body began to shatter, causing his body to tremble. "I've never been afraid of death." Those who had made a name for themselves in Jianghu were not afraid of death. "But after meeting you, this is the first time I've ever wished that I could live." Only when he was alive could he hold on to her firmly and not let go. Bai Weiwei's words were actually correct. After meeting her, he was indeed a coward and a good-for-nothing. He was even afraid of death. No trace of snow retracted his hand. His smile was gentle and bloodthirsty. "Forget it, I'll let you go." This was his rare act of kindness. He had never been so soft-hearted before. No trace of snow took a step back and fell down the cliff. Love had entered the heart and could not be undone. He couldn't escape the deadlock. Because he couldn't escape from her. Bai Weiwei watched as his body leaned back and fell. She rushed over without much thought. The system also roared, "Who asked you to torture him? Torture the male lead to death." "Fuck, male lead, aren't you very capable? Why did you suddenly become so disheartened that you jumped off the cliff to commit suicide?" Weiwei Bai said, "I didn't even jump, but he jumped first. What a weird move." The system said, "You're the weird one." Weiwei Bai said, "Am I not trembling in fear and trying to farm heartache value?" The system face-bombed. Heartache value is 99. Favorability value, 95. This was so miserable. The favorability value actually increased so much when no trace of snow jumped off the cliff. What kind of personality did no trace of snow have? The heartache value could not increase, but he would increase it greatly every time. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1336. The favorability would either not move or it would jump straight up. Extreme personality, extreme favorability, and extreme hatred. Weiwei Bai pounced forward, her right hand grabbing onto no trace of Snow's sleeve. Thanks to the wide robe, the sleeve was also very long. However, no trace of Snow's weight increased, causing the sleeve to split open. Weiwei Bai disregarded everything and used her other hand to grab onto his fingertips. If he really jumped off this cliff, he would probably die without a doubt. No trace of Snow's fingers tightened. He raised his head, blood dripping from the corner of his lips. His chest was already a shocking bright red. There was a strange expression on his face. His black eyes were shining with a hint of hope. It seemed strange, but it also seemed like he was hesitating. Her hands were actually very weak. After all, she did not have any martial art skills. She had the skills of an ordinary person. Grabbing onto him for a few seconds was already the limit. No trace of Snow did not struggle, nor did he use any strength. It was clearly very easy for him to go up. However, he allowed her to use all her strength to save him. Weiwei Bai's indifference shattered. She gritted her teeth and almost screamed, "No trace of Snow, you bastard. If you want to die, you can only die in my hands. Who allowed you to commit suicide?" Her eyes were filled with twisted pain and despair. The sarcasm and the smug look on her face just now that she had stabbed him in the heart had disappeared. Her fingers were trembling too much. Her body was constantly being dragged down by his weight. He was not helping her. She would be dragged down the cliff with him. No trace of Snow did not seem to understand what she was doing. His voice was even calm. "Aren't you playing with me?" She repeatedly stabbed him in the chest. What was she going to do this time? Weiwei Bai pursed her lips and her eyes were filled with tears. Her throat was trembling and her voice was hoarse. "I'm just toying with you. I've been toying with you since the beginning. I don't love you. No trace of Snow, I won't love you. So wake up. I beg you to stop being emotional." The pain of weeping blood. It was a sadness that seeped into his bones. She was still forcing a mocking smile. "I hate you to death, so you're not allowed to die." These words were simply a complete reversal of what he was talking about. However, she said it as if it was a matter of course. She was unreasonable, but Xue Wuhan didn't dare to believe it. He suddenly flung himself, and his entire body fell down. Her shocked and despairing face appeared in his black pupils. At this moment, no trace of Snow could even be said to be delighted. Regardless of whether it was fake or not, when she was sad, he could finally tell himself that she had him in her heart. He didn't dare to trust his own judgment. He didn't dare to believe that the despair in her eyes was real. But in the next moment, his pupils suddenly shrank. Wei Wei Bai was actually resolute. Without any hesitation, she jumped down from the cliff. Her skirt fluttered like a flower in the wind. She pulled open her belt and used all her strength, which had no internal energy, to straighten her belt. She wrapped it around his wrist. But the wind was too strong. She didn't have the strength to really tie him up. The belt loosened in an instant. Wei Wei Bai's face was full of tears. She looked at him helplessly. Her lips trembled as she silently called out, "Master?" No trace of Snow's mind was blank. No one would be willing to live and die together for a game, for a lie. She said that he had a secret method to bring the dead back to life. But the cliff was so high. If she fell down, her bones and flesh would probably be separated from her body. In this world, there couldn't be a method to bring a person back to life after their bones were crushed. For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button, comma. Chapter 1337. Rather than saying that she came back from the dead, she was actually faking her death. This was the most logical explanation. And this jump, it was impossible for her to fake her death. So, did she love him? No trace of Snow only felt the blood in his mouth, so astringent that it was disgusting. He saw that her belt was about to fall off. His fingers finally moved, and then he quickly reached out. Strength surged out from his fingertips as he suddenly grabbed her belt and pulled it hard. A huge amount of inner strength broke through the wind and pulled her body down. Her entire body was in the whistling wind as she was pulled into his embrace. Her skin was cold from the wind, and her body was also stiff, but he felt that her body was unbelievably beautiful. His lips were close to her ear, and the smell of blood stained her hair. "What do you want me to do? Wasn't it good that he was dead? He wouldn't pester her anymore. Shouldn't she hate him to death?" No trace of Snow laughed at himself, but his tone carried a desperate madness. "Is it because of the goo worm? But if I die, the goo worm will also die, so you will be free." Wei Wei Bai trembled, but she didn't have the ability to make a sound like him. Because the speed was too fast, and the wind was too fast, she was pulled into his embrace, buried in his chest, and couldn't even raise her head. No trace of Snow saw that her whole body was trembling, unable to resist the cold wind. His eyes finally softened, and he sighed softly. He reached out and pressed her head, stroking her hair, and lowered his head to cherish and kiss her hair. "If I don't die, you won't be free." After saying this, his body suddenly changed, and with the peak of Qinggong he walked on the wind. Although the backlash of this martial art was fatal, but the inner strength and martial arts that were exchanged with one's life were the best in the world. He had never been defeated by anyone, only he wanted to die. Otherwise, no difficulty would be enough to make him fall into a fatal situation. No trace of Snow's silver hair fluttered in the wind as he carried her. He stepped on a protruding rock and leaped up as light as a swallow. In front of his vigorous inner energy, the cliff rocks were like a steady flight of stairs. He hugged her and jumped back to the top of the mountain. The night was cold and the moonlight was clear. Wei Wei Bai was held in his arms, trembling nonstop. She was still afraid of death. She didn't even dare to raise her head. She could only grab onto his clothes tightly and bury her head in his chest. She was like an ostrich that refused to look outside. No trace of Snow heard her muffled and desperate whisper, "How can you die?" "I won't allow you to die, master." He stood there in a daze and hugged her even more tightly. She might have been scared out of her wits and didn't even know that she was saved. She was scared out of her wits. Where was the arrogant, domineering, vicious, and cunning look from before? Under the moonlight, no trace of Snow was shrouded in the moonlight. His blood-stained face was a little dazed. He had lost his usual calmness, and there was a hint of longing in his eyes. He didn't dare to believe her. But the things she did forced him to believe her. His heart was empty. It was filled with hate, doubt, love, and bitter happiness that he shouldn't have. No trace of Snow moved his lips, but in the end he couldn't speak. He didn't even want her to come back to her senses. He made her curl up in his arms and tremble nonstop. She wasn't going anywhere. No trace of Snow hugged her, lowered his head, and kissed the top of her head. His expression was tender and loving. the pain in his chest, the blood that was gushing up, and her trembling. All of these made him feel incomparably calm. She was afraid that he would die, so she deliberately provoked him, hated him, and didn't want to be with him. Or did she really hate him and just pretend to be affectionate for the sake of playing a game? He didn't care at the moment. He just wanted to hold her for a while longer. Enjoy this short period of time before his death. It was a rare moment of warmth. Chapter 1338. Wei Wei Bai's spirit was dispirited and her body was exhausted. After returning, no trace of snow had been tormenting her for a few days. This guy thought that he was going to die in a few days. That was why he was so clingy to her. In addition, he jumped off the cliff and thought of all kinds of follow-up plans. She realized that not only was her kidney deficient, but her body was probably going to be crippled. Wei Wei Bai shouted, "Tongzi, I'm so tired." System. Wei Wei Bai then remembered that the system was blocked. Because of their shameless life, the system was surrounded by bullet screens for a long time. Wei Wei Bai sighed that this strategy was not something that humans could do. Those who could do it were not humans. She climbed up from the bed and the blanket slid off her shoulders, revealing her slender and fair back. She lazily raised her hand to remove the white veil. However, a hand gently held her hand and pulled her back. No trace of Snow's tightly shut eyes slowly opened. They were incomparably clear, but the redness at the corners of his eyes carried a trace of bone-chilling evilness. He buried his face in her hair and said softly, "Are you hungry?" Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened and her lips curled into a sneer. "Didn't you feed me?" No trace of Snow was not surprised by her bold words. He got up and wrapped her in the blanket. Then, he got off the bed naked and casually put on his robe. His strong and beautiful back and the smooth lines of his muscles were so perfect that it was dazzling. After he casually put on his clothes, he walked out. Wei Wei Bai saw that he had left and wrapped herself tightly in the blanket. Then, she called the system. "Tongzi, how is no trace of Snow's body condition?" The system finally crawled out from the barrage of comments. It was on its last breath. "He's going to die. His body has suffered a terrible backlash. The deeper his emotions are, the faster his death will be. His favorability is too high. The reason he can hold on until now is because his physical fitness is top-notch." Wei Wei Bai asked, "How long can you last?" The system replied, "About half a month, but with your blood he can hold on for a long time." Her blood was not the real antidote, but suppressing no trace of Snow's emotional pain was still possible. Wei Wei Bai, looks like we can only increase our favorability. Originally, it was 99. He wanted to work harder to get it to 100. After all, she could farm in one plane for the rest of her life. To her, it was like a vacation. The main system said that he had to earn 100 heartbreak points to get this reward. She also knew that the side mission of this plane was this heart-wrenching mission. Furthermore, there was no punishment for this side mission. Wei Wei Bai knew that it was because the punishment of this side mission was linked to the next mission. If she filled it up, the side mission would be completed, and the next mission would reward her with a lifetime of time to explore the next plane. If she did not fill it up, the consequence of failure would be, was it because the time to explore the next plane might be very short? Wei Wei Bai did not ask the system, but she vaguely knew. There were many things that should not be said, but it told her everything. Wei Wei Bai was also afraid that she would cause too much of a burden to the system. The system hid many things from her. Could it not say that it was because of the system's rules? Wei Wei Bai hid the deep thoughts in her eyes, and suddenly said softly, "Tongzi." The system, "What's wrong?" Wei Wei Bai, "Nothing, I'm calling you." The system, then it silently swallowed the rest of the sausage, afraid that the host would know that it ate expired food again. When no trace of Snow returned, he saw Wei Wei Bai staring at the white veil with a confused expression, without the sharp gaze that she usually had when she was awake. At https://www.sashu.com/ Full text at https://www.sashu.com/. Download text at https://www. Sashu. At https://sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click Save below to record this reading record. Chapter 1339. He stood silently by the side for a while, staring at her silently. When she turned her head warily, he walked over and put a cup to her lips. She wanted to avoid it, but he had already pressed down on the back of her head, forcing her to raise her neck and drink the liquid in the cup. Wei Wei Bai frowned and slammed the cup in his hand. What did you make me drink this time? No trace of snow. No trace of snow pursed his lips and did not speak. The things she had been drinking recently were all from the Shui family's treasure vault. They had been hidden for many years and were almost unwilling to give it to outsiders. Wine was not intoxicating, it was more like clear water. However, its effects were amazing. It could open the meridians and mold the bones. Originally, when a person reached a certain age, their bones would be fixed and it was almost impossible to learn martial arts. Even if one was talented and mastered it, they would not be able to become an expert. Wei Wei Bai definitely could not practice martial arts at her age. But if he died, who could protect her? She was too attractive. Which man did not want to have her when they saw her? If she did not have martial arts, there would be a day sooner or later. Like now, she would be locked up by another man. Just like what he did. When a man became a beast, there was basically nothing that he could not do. No trace of snow wanted to take her with him, but after jumping off a cliff, he found that he could be so soft-hearted towards a woman. She was willing to jump down to accompany him once. He was actually satisfied. No trace of snow's fingers gently touched her lips that were stained with wine and said indifferently, "I won't poison you to death." Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely and suddenly turned around, not wanting to look at him. No trace of snow looked at her capricious appearance helplessly. She seemed to be angry. No trace of snow lowered his eyes, his eyelashes drooping, a burning emotion surging in the depths of his eyes. He reached out his slender fingers and gently stroked her long hair. Then, without any hesitation, he carried her up with the blanket. Wei Wei Bai had no room to refuse and was taken out by him. No trace of snow took her to see the flowers. The place where he had locked her up was the Shui clan's headquarters in the back mountains. Very few people could enter this place. Especially after he killed someone and ruined his reputation, this place became even more desolate. Walking across the lonely stone bridge, he put her on the swing. Wei Wei Bai looked at the sky full of flowers. No trace of snow. This is the sea of flowers in the backyard. They were planted in the past, but no one took care of them, so they bloomed like this. The soil here was fertile, and once the seeds of flowers entered the soil, they would wantonly grow like this. When Wei Wei Bai saw that it was outside, a trace of anger and embarrassment flashed across her face. "Can't you let me put on some clothes?" Ever since she jumped off the cliff, this guy didn't even give her a single piece of clothing. No trace of snow smiled. "I'm not giving it to you because I'm afraid you'll run away." Wei Wei Bai snorted. "You have so much confidence in me. With you here, where can I run to?" With his martial arts skills, not to mention her. Even if it was a nest of ants, he could catch all of them in one go. Not a single one could escape. Having high martial arts skills was a super cheat. Hearing, smell, and vigilance. It was simply frightening. When her breathing changed, he could immediately tell if she was awake or pretending to be asleep. Sometimes, when she wanted to lie to him, she had to weigh her own abilities and give up in the end. It wasn't that her acting skills were bad, it was that she couldn't fake the sound of her heartbeat and her constant breathing while sleeping. No matter how much she pretended to be, it was useless. No trace of snow looked at her deeply, but didn't answer. In his current state, his body could collapse at any time. He was afraid that if he suddenly collapsed, she would leave without even looking at him. Chapter 1340. At least she had to wear clothes to buy some time. Once he recovered, he would still be able to catch her. Before he died, no matter how miserable he was, he would not let go. This was his last bit of kindness. After all, He even had the selfish thought of dragging her to his death. No trace of snow did not say anything else. He silently pulled out a long sword, then slowly walked towards the flower field. Wei Wei Bai wrapped herself in the blanket like a cocoon and looked at him. But she realized that the path no trace of snow walked, the flowers were all broken. The petals flew up. The petals that filled the sky and the ground flew away with his steps. Flowers, one by one, were crushed and scattered by his power. And these petals turned into a rain of flowers. It was as beautiful as a fairyland. The most beautiful was still the man standing in the middle of the rain of flowers. His white robe and silver hair fluttered in the wind. When he turned around, his long sword was already in his hand. A beautiful sword dance began to dance in the midst of the petals. The sword dance was cold and fierce, but very beautiful. It had the strength of a man, but was as light as a flower. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. No trace of snow is going to become a deity. The system looked. His family seems to have a tradition. Wei Wei Bai, what tradition? The system. It's a sword dance for his wife, and it's an ancestral sword dance. Every move of the sword dance has its own rules. Each move has a different meaning. Wei Wei Bai was curious. What do they mean? The system immediately started the live broadcast. He stepped on the petals and turned them into a rain of petals. It means that you're as beautiful as a flower and intoxicating. He started the first move. The first move means that he fell in love with you at first sight. The second move means that the sword moves with the person. It means that he tosses and turns in bed for you, seeking you all the time. The third move means that he gets what he desires and is overjoyed. The fourth move means that he loves you as his own, holding your hand for life. At this point, the system suddenly stopped. No trace of snow withdrew the last move of the fourth sword form. His figure paused, and an unsuppressible burning heat slowly appeared on his face that was as calm as ice. Then, he began to use the fifth sword form. The system replied, usually, once the fourth sword form is over, it's over. No one from the Shui family knows how to perform the fifth sword form. Wei Wei Bai looked at no trace of snow standing in the flower field. His otherworldly temperament made the petals in the sky lose their color. He was the only one who stunned everyone. Then he looked back at her with a faint smile in his eyes. That smile came from the bottom of his heart, without a trace of his usual hypocritical pretense. Wei Wei Bai blushed, and then she lowered her eyelashes as if she couldn't bear his smile. No trace of snow slowly began to perform the last sword move of the Snow family's sword dance manual. This sword manual was very old. Almost no one would jump for the final sword strike. Because the Shui family liked the promise of this life, and did not think about the uncertain and hopeless next life. The meaning of the last sword form was to make a promise in the next life. This sword form was sincere and did not have any fierce power. But it carried a humble begging. Such a humble request was not what the Shui family liked. They would rather not have the next life than ask for anything in this world. Who would have thought that he would jump for the last sword form? Seeing the trace of infatuation and surprise in Wei Wei Bai's eyes. He knew that she did not understand this, and simply thought that it looked good. No trace of snow revealed a smile. After he finished his sword dance, he withdrew the last sword form, and hid all of his humble begging. He begged her to make a promise with him in the next life. He knew that it was a childish and foolish idea, but he still did it. For the https://www.sashu.com/ for the full text, https://www.sashu.com for the TXT for that. Chapter 1341. Fortunately, she didn't understand his childish thoughts, or else she would look down on him again. No trace of snow kept his sword and walked towards her. Suddenly, he staggered and his vision turned black. A pain with the smell of blood attacked his body. He couldn't take it anymore and suddenly stabbed his sword into the ground. He knelt on one knee and spat out a mouthful of blood. Blood dyed the petals red. He had difficulty breathing and couldn't stand up. Wei Wei Bai had already gotten off the swing. She called out to him strangely, "No trace of snow?" No trace of Snow's eyelashes trembled as he looked at her with unfocused eyes. His beautiful eyes were actually numb. He wanted to hold on to his last bit of consciousness, wanting to see if she was still there. Or if she had escaped. She always liked to do this. After escaping, she came back to tease him. Then she would escape again. He originally thought that he was a scumbag and fickle enough. In the end, after meeting her, he knew what it meant to be temperamental. She said she loved him and said she didn't love him. After saying she didn't love him, she came to save him. This was the first time he had been put in such a difficult position by a woman. He was even neurotic and paranoid. She walked closer to him and hesitantly called out, "Master?" No trace of Snow suddenly reached out and grabbed her hand. He wanted to seal her acupuncture points so that she couldn't move. But a thought made him hesitate. If he died like this, wouldn't it be better to let her go? He didn't want her to see him die. With this hesitation, she had already struggled to break free from his hand. No trace of Snow's weak fingers were flung away by her. His unfocused pupils constricted and his expression turned sinister. She was going to escape. No trace of Snow coughed out a few mouthfuls of blood. He wanted to stand up, but he fell directly to the ground. The sword in his hand fell to the ground. He lay on the ground, spitting out blood without any regard for his life. The backlash was too strong. His meridians couldn't withstand such a violent and terrifying attack. His silver hair scattered down, also stained with blood. Shui Wuhan raised his eyes. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai had already turned around and ran away, she dragged the blanket and ran forward barefooted. The sound of the bell gradually faded away. No trace of Snow's vision began to be eroded by the darkness, but his hand was still reaching forward helplessly. He wanted to grab her. He wouldn't let her run away. No trace of Snow's eyes lost their light, and his eyelids couldn't hold on any longer. Finally he sighed. His fingers finally fell to the ground in despair. He couldn't keep her. No trace of Snow never thought that before he died, he would be so unwilling to let her go. In the future, he would not exist in her life. Just as he was about to give up and completely sink into the darkness, his fingers were suddenly held by someone, and he felt a little wet and warm. It was as if her palms were sweaty. No trace of Snow's half-closed eyes trembled. In a daze, he saw Wei Wei Bai's anxious expression appear. Her face was very red, as if she had run too fast. So her forehead was also covered in sweat. His weak fingers flexed, wanting to grab her fingers. This was his last consciousness, and then he completely fainted. This sleep was very long, and he thought that he wouldn't wake up. The tip of his nose was filled with the smell of blood. No trace of Snow frowned. His eyelids moved, and he finally opened his eyes. Then he saw himself lying on the bed, and the white gauze was tied up. He heard the sound of something winding. He turned to look, only to see a thin figure sitting on a chair. The long bandage on the table was spread out, and she was wrapping the bandage around her wrist. The sunlight shone in, and her shadow was beautiful and illusory. There was a strong smell of blood in the air. No trace of Snow at first thought that he had vomited blood, but suddenly he felt that something was wrong. The pain in his chest that had always been there was gone. His broken meridians were not a big problem. No trace of Snow raised his hand and looked strangely at the palm lines on his palm. He found that everything was fine. His power was also there, and his body showed no signs of collapsing. No trace of Snow suddenly woke up, and he jumped up from the bed. Wei Wei Bai was shocked, and quickly hid her hands in her sleeves. Without thinking, she got up and ran out. No trace of Snow was extremely fast, and before her hand touched the door, he had already appeared in front of it. She directly crashed into his arms. No trace of Snow held his breath. The smell of blood on her body was too strong. He glanced at the table, which was full of medicine bottles and blood-stained gauze. No trace of Snow's eyelids trembled. His eyes were sharp and cold with anger. "What did you use to save me?" His voice was trembling. Wei Wei Bai looked up, her face was unusually pale. She raised her eyebrows and laughed disdainfully. "Who saved you? It's best if you die." No trace of Snow's chest was crushed by something, and there was a shattering pain. He held her hand, not allowing her to refuse, and raised it up. His sleeves fell to her elbows. On her wrist, there was a blood-stained bandage, and blood was oozing out uncontrollably. No trace of Snow used his inner strength, and the bandage broke. A deep wound appeared on her wrist, and the bone was visible. It was not just one wound, but one wound after another, almost to the bone. Her meridians were broken. Her hand was completely crippled. No trace of Snow stared blankly at her hand. He had tried his best to reconstruct her muscles and bones. But she destroyed herself. Chapter 1342. His fingers couldn't help but exert more strength, bit by bit, as if he wanted to break her wrist. Wei Wei Bai frowned. Her eyes flashed with pain, but she didn't make a sound. No trace of Snow's expression turned sinister. He clenched his teeth, as if he wanted to eat her up. He saw that the blood on her wrist kept flowing down. He lowered his head and sucked on the cold blood. Extreme Een body was the only thing that suppressed his martial arts. The first time they met, he wanted to kill her. At that time, he saw the flower on her shoulder and knew about her body constitution, so he let her go. But now, he hated the thing that let her go. He tried his best to adjust her body so that her meridians could perfectly withstand his inner strength. She crippled half of it. Before he died, he would forcefully inject all of his inner strength into her body. His inner strength was the inner strength of his swordsmanship. He had to rely on his hands. Crippling his hands was equivalent to crippling half of his martial arts. He really wanted to just take her away, so that he wouldn't be so worrisome. He wouldn't be able to die in peace. His eyes were sinister red, his face was like white jade, and his messy silver hair was like a waterfall. His entire being was filled with a cold sense of despair. Wei Wei Bai felt the wound on her wrist. It was so painful that she couldn't bear it. He sucked so hard that he wanted to bite off her hand. Her cowering tremble was detected by him. No trace of Snow's breathing became more chaotic. He finally let go of her hand and pulled her to the side of the table expressionlessly. He personally mixed the medicine, applied it, and wrapped the bandages around her. The process was oppressive and meticulous. He lowered his eyes. His eyes were extremely cold. His love was too deep. Hatred was also growing. She could always let him see hope in his despair. But this hope was better not to have it. The most painful thing for a person was not complete despair. It was uncertain hope. It was even the hope of deception. Wei Wei Bai's erratic feelings were almost unbearable for him. No trace of Snow saw the scattered medicines on the table, as well as the blood-stained medicine jar. His voice was slightly hoarse. "Do you think you can save me like this?" Although her blood could alleviate the pain in his body, he was too deeply in love, and she did not have the ability to suppress his power. Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly. "Can't you not love me?" Her voice was flat, rigid, and filled with suppressed anger. No trace of Snow looked up. In his deep eyes, it was as if a stone had been thrown into a lake, causing a few ripples. No. He was indifferent but firm. He even smiled. The blood at the corner of his lips was beautiful and strange. Wei Wei Bai's face immediately turned pale. The cold determination in her eyes shattered, and an extremely sorrowful expression appeared on her face. Her crippled hand weakly clutched at his sleeve. "No trace of Snow, I hate you," she said sorrowfully and helplessly. She could no longer maintain her previous emotionlessness. Even the infatuation that she had hidden was revealed. Her eyes were filled with desolation and fragility. "I've done so many things to make you angry. Why can't you do what you did before and pierce my heart with a sword and live on?" When she said that her heart was pierced by a sword, there was not the slightest bit of hatred. There was only anger that was filled with resentment. No trace of Snow's lips moved. A lot of words were stuck in his throat, but he did not know what to say. It was lying to him, or did she really love him? No trace of Snow looked at her blankly for a while. Suddenly, he reached out and touched her face, feeling the despair and pain in her trembling body. Chapter 1343. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to cling on to him. She was afraid that he would die, so she needed more warmth to fill the fear in her heart. No trace of snow paused for a moment, but in the end, he let himself be seduced by her. He pulled her completely into the beautiful intertwining. The system was speechless. Fuck your second brother, is it going to spend the rest of its life with the bullet screen? The days passed in Wei Wei Bai and no trace of Snow's shameless bullet screen life. The system finally found the time to remind her, wake up, dog couple, no, host, it's time. Wei Wei Bai was in a daze with the book in her hands, and only reacted when she heard the system's words, what's the favorability now? The system blurted out, 90? Bullshit I can't say. Wei Wei Bai also came back to her senses. She did not want to ask, it was just a reflex. She thought for a while, then said, I don't understand many of these books, no trace of Snow's knot is really stubborn. The system said, you really want to save no trace of Snow? Wei Wei Bai said, it's just an act, isn't it to get favorability? The system. You're too good at acting, I've cried so many times, I'm always out of tune with the host because I'm not perverted enough. Wei Wei Bai said, but if you want to act like it, you have to act like it, slacking off so much? Oh, I mean you've been reading the books for so many days, even if you can't save him, you have to at least say something. Otherwise, everyone would know that she did not read the books, wouldn't she fail to act cool? The system said, so, what do you mean? Wei Wei Bai said without much care, can you spend a day's worth of life points to buy me a summary of the books that can deceive people? The system, so the host has been reading so many books, it's all an act? You can't even recite the summary of the books, did you use all your time to daydream? She wanted no trace of Snow dead. She did not want to save him at all. A scammer who cheated others of their favorable impression points. The system spat in its heart and wiped away its tears of abuse. In the future, if it still believed in the cheap acting skills of its host, it would follow her surname. The system glanced at the discounted goods. There's a low-level version of the luck booster that gives you 2 days of HP. It's a one-time use type. You just have to throw it and it will pick out a book that suits you best. Wei Wei Bai's heart ached for his 2 days of life, but to show off, he still bought it. After all, it took a lot of effort to fool no trace of Snow. After being lazy for so many days, if she couldn't come up with a summary of the secret manual, it would be strange if no trace of Snow didn't suspect her. After the system gave Wei Wei Bai the beginner one-time lucky booster that had been eliminated, it said, make a wish and I'll throw it away. Wei Wei Bai said casually, I'll choose the secret manual that can completely cure no trace of Snow's dead knot. There was a mountain of secret manuals. Most of them were books that had nothing to do with no trace of Snow's martial arts. So Wei Wei Bai's purpose was to choose the book related to the dead knot and then read a few pages. When she was chatting with no trace of Snow, she could also say a few words to make him believe that she was not slacking off, but was trembling with fear as she read the books to find a way to save him. As for why she made such a big wish, she said that it was a wish. Of course, she had to wish for the best. Just as she finished speaking, a small dot of light appeared in the air. Only Wei Wei Bai and the system could see the dot of light. The dot of light, which was as small as a firefly, flew around the mountain of ancient books and suddenly landed on an inconspicuous thin book with a blue cover. This was the book that was at the bottom of the pile. Wei Wei Bai did not have a chance to flip through it at all. She casually pulled it out and flipped it open. She was stunned for a moment before continuing to flip through it. The book was very thin, but it was not difficult either. It was just that it was hidden too deep, and not many people thought of reading it. So it was missed for many years. After she finished reading it, she sighed, these 2 days of life points were really worth it. It was the system's first time hearing the host say that it was worth it. Once she spent her life points, she felt that it was not worth it no matter how valuable the function was. Was it worth more than her life points? Then it heard her say, I found the way to solve no trace of Snow's dead knot. The system, what? What the hell, how did you find it? A dead knot that was 3 times harder to solve, how could it be solved so easily? Wei Wei Bai burned the book and clapped her hands, all right, let's go torture no trace of Snow. The system, what? Host, wake up, your affinity is not full yet. No trace of snow is going to be tortured silly by you. The Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. The Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1344. No trace of snow carried a wooden food box. He seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact, one step was like 10 steps forward. He had recently begun to study how to connect Wei Wei Bai's meridians. Every time he saw the wound on her wrist and the scar on her chest, it was like two fatal swords stabbing into his chest, causing him to be restless day and night. No trace of snow walked into the house and found that the house was full of books, scattered and thrown messily, but that familiar figure was not there. He put the food box on the table and his figure floated up. In an instant he had walked through the entire house and the nearby places. But no, there was no familiar sound of the bell. There was also no sign of her. No trace of snow frowned slightly. Where did she go? During this period of time, she had almost never left this place. Even if she did, she would look for secret manuals and ancient books. No trace of snow felt a faint uneasiness in his heart, but he forced himself to suppress it. Then he walked towards the library. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and walked to the table in the blink of an eye. He saw an inconspicuous piece of paper between an ancient book. No trace of snow opened the book and saw Wei Wei Bai's handwriting on the paper. He touched the beautiful handwriting with his fingers because he was too excited. Wei Wei Bai's handwriting was a little messy. Master, I found a way to save you. Then there was an address. No trace of snow was stunned, and then smiled helplessly. What kind of method made her so excited? She said several times that she would find a way to save him. But she never succeeded. He played along with her whims. Anyway, it was fine as long as she was happy. No trace of snow picked up the food box, which contained the red bean and lotus seed soup that he had made himself. Recently, she had been talking about eating sweet things. He was afraid that she would have a bad appetite, so he did not let her eat anything too sweet. Today, he was in a bad mood, so he made a bowl for her. The place was not far away. It was the place where the sword was forged. The furnace was always sealed here. After all, a good sword took a long time to forge. And after it was forged, the furnace would not be opened again for a long time. He walked in and saw that the fire was on. She was sitting not far from the furnace. Her black hair was tied up, and the red ribbon was very bright in the black hair. Wei Wei Bai muttered to herself, "A fire." Shui Wuhan silently appeared behind her. "What do you mean by, not enough?" Bai Wei Wei was startled. When she turned her head and saw that it was him, her eyes held a smile. "You are here, master." Shui Wuhan followed her example and squatted down. Her white robe overlapped with her beautiful skirt. "What good method did you see again? Do you want to test it?" She had always been willful and reckless. Those methods of saving people were also unique and peculiar. Bai Wei Wei touched her face. "Use your furnace to refine some medicine." No trace of snow looked behind the furnace. The flames were burning fiercely in the furnace. He was in a trance. "I remember when I was young, I saw my first sword being born in this furnace. All the swords in the Shui family came from this furnace." Wei Wei Bai was a little curious. Her dark eyes were filled with pure curiosity. "What was master like when you were young?" No trace of snow casually supported his chin with one hand. "When I was young, I was very naughty." Wei Wei Bai was a little doubtful. "Very naughty?" No trace of snow. "I liked to play pranks. Then I would pretend to be a good person to comfort others. Then I would stab them when they were not on guard. I liked this kind of game very much." Chapter 1345. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "What a strange way of being naughty." The system said, "Can you be more direct? What a wicked way of being naughty." It was not growing up, but becoming a pervert. It was the pervert who grew up. No trace of snow recalled his past calmly. I know I'm different from others. Maybe it was this martial art that drove me crazy. The Shui family, from the first generation to the present. Almost all of them stood at the top of the martial arts world and never came down. Because their martial arts were too heaven-defying. There was no secret technique that could surpass this martial art that did not allow one to fall in love. The more heaven-defying it was, the more undefeatable it was. The more fatal the flaw was. Not being able to fall in love would kill, and it would cause one to go crazy. Maybe it was because of the curse, but every man who inherited this martial art knew the taboo of not being able to fall in love. But none of them could escape the cage of love. Once they fell in love, it was almost irreversible until they went crazy and died. This was also the reason why the Shui family was dying. In his generation, his father went crazy and died because of love, and his mother committed suicide. He was the only direct heir left in his family. He thought he could escape the curse of being in love. He knew that he had a cold heart when he was young. Forget about love, he would not even be moved by family or friendship. No trace of snow looked at her and found that she was looking at him with both hands holding her chin and smiling. She seemed to be very interested in his past. No trace of snow did not like to recall the past, and there was nothing to remember. But seeing that she was interested, he began to talk about his past. I learned this martial art on my own accord, because I knew that once I mastered it, I would be the best in the world. Being the best in the world was still very tempting to him when he was young. After all, he liked to play pranks and watch people go crazy and die. Only with invincible martial arts could he perfectly maintain this hobby. After I mastered it, even if I wanted to give up this martial art, I couldn't. I'm basically in a state of waiting for death. Just like now, he was so deeply in love that he had no idea how to cripple his martial arts. Wei Wei Bai gently leaned her head on his shoulder and smiled cutely. No, I will save you. No trace of snow heard her words, and his mood improved. He looked down at her, but only saw her snow-white side face. Under the illumination of the fire, there was a kind of bright and enchanting beauty that made people's hearts flutter. She suddenly said softly, "When I was young, I was very lively too." No trace of snow. How lively! When you like someone, you can't help but want to know everything about that person. Wei Wei Bai, I know I'm very pretty, and everyone likes me, so I like to make those who like me suffer. Was this scum reminiscing about the past? One pushed a person into hell. One likes the pain of others. They were born to be a pair of trash. The system silently distanced itself from this pair of trash lovers. No trace of snow smiled carelessly. It's a very good hobby. This way, no one will be able to get you. Wei Wei Bai smiled happily. Of course, do you know what I like to do the most? Once I'm sure that a man likes me, I will pretend to like him too. Those fools are so cute, they will believe whatever I say. My most amazing part is that when I cry, men will believe anything I say. No trace of Snow's smile disappeared, and he replied faintly, when you cry, even if they don't believe it, they can't bear to. Chapter 1346. When she cried, it was even more painful than when he was aroused. Wei Wei Bai didn't care and said, "You're still a fool. I'm not interested in these fools who really like me. When I was young, my biggest dream was..." No trace of Snow heard her pause, as if hesitating to say it. She whispered to herself, "If I say it, you'll laugh at me for being a lunatic." No trace of Snow's eyes darkened and said indifferently, "I'm already a lunatic. If you're a lunatic, we'll be a pair." Wei Wei Bai immediately laughed. "Then I'll say it. My dream since I was young was to have a beautiful love." She was indeed a fool. But she wasn't a lunatic. Before No trace of Snow could breathe a sigh of relief, her soft voice whispered into his ear. Her soft and gentle voice rang in his ears. "Then tear it apart." No trace of Snow was stunned. Her breath was already far away. Then he realized that his body had softened and his martial arts had been sealed. No trace of Snow was still sitting, but he looked at her with a complicated expression. Wei Wei Bai got up, her skirt swaying. Her cute appearance had changed. She came to the stove and looked at it seriously, then threw something in. A rich fragrance began to fill the whole room. You know that I'm the successor of the saintess, right? My mother told me since I was young that when we saintesses want to succeed, we need to sacrifice a man's pure love. Wei Wei Bai flirtatiously pulled at her skirt, revealing the bell on her ankle. She turned around, lifted her delicate toes, and used the heel of her foot to press against his limp lower jaw. Then she gently lifted his face with her foot. This action was like a master treating a slave, high and mighty. No trace of Snow was expressionless. There was no trace of hatred or anger in his eyes. Instead, it was peaceful and could even be called gentle. He seemed to think that she was playing a prank again. Wei Wei Bai saw him like this and couldn't help but laugh. You've really fallen in love with me. My mother told me that, of course, this ceremony is very difficult, so no saintess can do it. Because of the pure love, no matter how charming you are, no man can really give it to you. Her posture was flirtatious. When she lifted her foot, her skirt flowed like a flower. When no trace of Snow looked down, he saw the bell on her ankle. It was cute and sexy. Her every move was filled with natural charm. Like a demon. She was getting better at using her assets. Bai Weiwei released her foot and lightly held his face in her hands. Your martial arts were sealed. How pitiful. Do you hate me? Shui Wuhan silently used his internal energy to attack his sealed meridians. It wasn't that he couldn't break through, he just needed time. He smiled. Weiwei, I can't hate you. She was always capricious, but he knew that she was definitely thinking of ways to make him hate her. Falling in love was a knot in his heart. As long as he stopped loving, the knot would be untied. She kept tormenting him, saying that she loved him, and saying that she hated him. Wasn't it just to make him stop loving her? To save his life? She had said that there was a way to save him, and this was the only way he could think of. Therefore, he knew that she was in complete despair. There was definitely no way to save him in the secret manual, so she went back to her old ways and told him not to fall in love. Perhaps it really was a curse. He looked at her beautiful face and thought that her cheeks were flushed like peach blossoms. The men of the Shui family couldn't escape the knot in their lives. He would always die for a woman. His voice became gentle. When I see you, I always feel that dying is worth it. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. / crossover system, Adonis, come here. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here. Mobile crossover system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 1347. Wei Wei Bai was not moved at all. She looked at him coldly. Do you really love me that much? No trace of Snow was not pretentious. When I love you, aren't you very happy? He was talking about when they were in bed. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have thought of those as well. She touched his face longingly and then sighed. That's true. The man I find in the future will not be as good as you. It will be troublesome. No trace of Snow's pupils shrank and his smile turned cold. In the future, don't talk about finding a man. He was petty and did not allow her to think about the future so easily. He could not see it after he died, but now he could not tolerate her thinking about other men. Wei Wei Bai did not care about his anger. She pulled out his sword and looked down at the sharp blade. Okay, I won't talk about it. After all, you are the first man I truly love, so I have to treat you better. After saying that, she cut open his wrist with the sword in her hand. The meridians in his wrist were cut. No trace of Snow saw blood spurting out from his wrist and splashing onto the ground. Wei Wei Bai took a few steps back, but the back of her foot was still splashed with blood. It was beautiful and flirtatious. She looked at it faintly as if she was a little disgusted, but her emotions were very calm. It was as if she was looking at an insignificant little thing. And that was his blood. No trace of Snow laid on the ground powerlessly. His internal energy began to rush through his meridians. He was just a little bit away from success. But for some reason he suddenly stopped. He let himself lie on the ground and listened to the sound of the fire burning. He looked at her extremely indifferent eyes. It was not that she did not have any emotions. It was not like before when she pretended to not love him. It was not that successful. When she pretended not to love him, there would always be traces of love and hate mixed with pain. Right now, she was gorgeous, but her expression was too cold and casual. Instead, there was a trace of coldness and holiness. It could even be said that she was feeling real. Wei Wei Bai was indeed feeling real. She looked at him indifferently. His heart was neither sad nor happy, neither disgusted nor amazed. Her isolated feelings never had the chance to enter her heart. No trace of Snow's silver hair draped over the ground. Red blood seeped out from his snow-white wrist. His white robe, silver hair, and red blood. There was a kind of extreme morbid beauty that made people feel suffocated. But this kind of beauty couldn't leave a trace in her calm and hard heart. The system suddenly said softly, "Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai's heart trembled. She rarely heard the system call her name. The system replied, "Nothing, just calling you." It knew that the emotional shielding function was so powerful that it could create a dream isolation for Yi Yuxuan. It was even more impossible for Wei Wei Bai to escape from this powerful shielding ability. That was why it was suddenly afraid just now. She had blocked out all her feelings. Fortunately, she still treated it the same as before. Emotions couldn't block reality. The system knew that it was her only connection to reality, so in this plane, she would only have feelings for it. It raised its head and looked at the shielding device. Then it fell silent. This emotionless state was the most perfect, because this way, she wouldn't be in pain and break down. As for whether or not Yi Yuxuan would break down in pain, it was Wei Wei Bai's system. It didn't care whether Yi Yuxuan lived or died. It was fine as long as Wei Wei Bai lived. Wei Wei Bai didn't think as much as the system. She wanted no trace of Snow to believe that she didn't have feelings for him. Chapter 1348. She directly exposed the fact that she really had no feelings for him. Unlike before, when she said that she had no feelings and hated him to death. In fact, all kinds of subtle expressions made no trace of Snow suspect that she was lying. She lazily shook her ankle, and the sound of the bell had a clear and cold feeling. The long sword in her hand gently rested on no trace of Snow's left wrist. She was cold and casual. "Master, I'm afraid that you'll break through the limits of the poison, so I'll cripple you first." Her words did not have any emotional fluctuations. It was as if she had done a very ordinary thing, as if she had casually thrown away a piece of trash. Would anyone feel proud or show off after throwing away a piece of trash? No, everyone felt that it was very ordinary. At this moment, no trace of Snow felt that in Wei Wei Bai's eyes, he was just a piece of trash that was casually thrown away. After throwing it away, it would not even leave a ripple in her heart. His incomparable belief in her love was suddenly shaken. "Wei Wei Bai, are you doing this to make me hate you?" Hating her was not emotional. It was equivalent to letting him live. This thought made him not feel the slightest bit of sadness even when facing her sword. Wei Wei Bai smiled. "If you think so, then so be it. Anyway, I'm happy for you to be so optimistic before you die." After saying that, the tip of the sword pierced and pulled open. The meridians in both of his hands were broken. The kind of wound that had no chance of recovery. Blood gushed out and dyed his white robe and the ends of his silver hair red. He looked at her with a fiery and complicated gaze, as if he could not understand, but also as if he was shaken. Wei Wei Bai nimbly avoided his blood, and accidentally stained her skirt a little. She frowned and reached out to brush it away as if she was brushing away dust. However, the bloodstains were stained, and even if it came in contact with water, it would not fade easily. She said with some regret, "I really like this dress, but I can't wear it like this." Then, she weighed the sword in her hand. "It's all Master's fault. Why did he make this sword so heavy?" No trace of Snow's voice was a little hoarse. "If I knew you were going to take it, I would have made a lighter sword so that your hand wouldn't be sore." When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she finally revealed a smile. "Master, you really love me. You love me so much that I'm silly and cute. In the past, my mother said that if a man likes a woman, no matter how smart he is, he will become a fool. I didn't believe it, But when I saw you, I realized that it was true. As she spoke, she cut off the meridians in his feet with some difficulty. Both his hands and feet were crippled. No trace of Snow knew that there was no possibility of recovery with such a degree of rupture of the meridians. She really wanted to cripple him. There was no room for negotiation. More than half of his body was soaked in blood. His eyes were extremely dark, like a bottomless abyss, but there was a gentleness that could not be removed from his face. On a man's body, there was actually an icy cold refinement and a tender fragility at the same time. Wei Bai was not moved at all. She threw away the sword and complained, "It's so heavy." She was still delicate and willful. Her temperament was still cold and vicious. No trace of Snow's heart slowly sank. The color on his face turned pale as the blood drained away. He could not find a trace of liking for him in her expression. He used to like playing games. When he was the most excited, he saw the appearance of those people falling into hell. But once those people really fell, he would not be interested and would start to slack and be lazy, even disdainful and impatient. Quick. Chapter 1349. And Wei Bai's current appearance was very similar to how he used to look after picking the fruit of the game. It was exactly the same. He had completely fallen in love with her. To her, this love game was over. She even somewhat disliked his existence now. Because she had already successfully captured him, she viewed him as useless trash. No trace of Snow moved his lips. His eyes were filled with many emotions, but in the end he was still unwilling to believe it. He was more willing to believe that she was treating him so cruelly just to keep him alive. No trace of Snow suddenly raised his powerless hand. Blood flowed down his wrist. It was exceptionally tragic. His fingers barely managed to pinch her skirt. His face that was as pale as paper had a calm and strange expression. It was as if he was just puzzled. "For me, you would rather cut off your own wrist. Could it be that you would do this for a game?" Wei Bai raised her hand. Her wrist was still wrapped in bandages. She frowned and said, "Originally, I didn't want to do this, but when you used the sword to kill me, it completely aroused my competitive spirit. To be able to obtain your love by cutting off one of my hands is an exceptionally enjoyable process for me." The harder his love was, the more she gave, the more she felt that this love game was very challenging. Moreover, at my age, I can't learn martial arts. Cutting off the meridians in one of my hands is not a big loss. Compared to no trace of Snow, the price of her hand was the same as the price of his 4 limbs being crippled. It was like the difference between heaven and earth. No trace of Snow's eyes trembled. He slowly closed his eyes. His breathing was heavy and painful. She did not know that the reason he helped her expand her meridians was to give her all of his internal energy. That was why she felt that her hand was not important at all. It was not important to the point that she could use it to exchange for her love and trust. No trace of Snow was practically on the verge of death. He still refused to believe that all of this was just a trap. "When you jumped off the cliff with me, was it also for the game?" His trust in her was built up from the crazy actions she had taken time and time again to get close to him without regard for her life. When Wei Bai heard his words, she couldn't help but laugh. "Because I trust you, you definitely won't die. Your martial arts are so high, you can catch me if I jump down, how can I die?" She firmly believed that he would not die. His kung fu allowed them to return to the cliff. Her method of deceiving people was not perfect, nor was it the most exquisite. However, he was the most stubborn and the most unscrupulous. Wei Bai slowly squatted down, avoiding his blood. She stretched out her clean and beautiful fingers and touched his face. She said softly, "Master, do you know what that stove is for?" No trace of Snow looked at her without moving his eyes. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Arousal, the extreme arousal actually made the drug she made with her blood ineffective. His chest was in so much pain that it felt like it was going to split open. Wei Bai didn't care and said, "The drug is ineffective? How pitiful! You have to suffer this kind of torture when you're aroused. Although I was quite happy when I saw you acting up, it was fun after all." She actually felt that the pain of his arousal was very fun. No trace of snow finally couldn't hold it in and spat out a mouthful of blood. The pain in his eyes finally appeared. His fingers could barely hold on to her skirt. His face was mottled with blood. His brows were fierce and mournful, like a beast that had been forced to a dead end. But his voice became softer. Wei Wei. Crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Calmed. Chapter 1350. Wei Wei Bai, however, did not have much patience. She giggled and pulled his fingers away. All right, let's part on good terms. No trace of snow, I still have to find the next man. You are just a sacrifice for me to become the saintess, and you are also my trial work. She said it so lightly, it seems that it is not difficult to obtain a man's absolute love. Which man do you think is better for the next? No trace of snow's fingers were pulled away by her, and she casually threw them into the blood water. She stood up and said excitedly, didn't a young black-clothed swordsman appear in Jianghu recently? I heard that he is quite good-looking, and his personality is also disdainful of women. Perhaps he is more difficult to obtain. No trace of Snow's eyes dimmed. He looked at her back as she turned around without a care. A sorrowful pain surged from his chest, and finally made his eyes turn red. It turned out that the taste of being treated as a game trophy was not good. No trace of Snow smiled, but his smile was very ugly. It was so ugly that it looked like he was crying. He opened his mouth, and hatred rolled in his chest. Finally, his cold and deep voice sounded, carrying a trace of humility. Wei Wei Bai, I made red bean soup for you. Drink it while it is hot. He thought that she would like it, so he couldn't wait to personally make it. He was afraid that it would be cold, so he kept it warm with his internal energy. The red bean soup should still be warm. Wei Wei Bai was interrupted. She turned around and said angrily, What's so good about red bean soup? So long-winded. After saying this, she walked over to him with light steps. Looking at his battered and exhausted appearance, Wei Wei Bai's expression was cold. She said, Master, it is almost time. You should go to the furnace. This is also the process of becoming the saintess and sacrificing a man's love. When she said this, she revealed a deep and affectionate smile. In her eyes, the smile was as bright as the broken light on the surface of a lake. Her voice became gentle and sweet. Master, you still love me, right? No trace of Snow looked at her silently. She was like a cruel flame, so dazzling that it attracted people to die. He used all his strength to raise his crippled hand, wanting to touch her face. Love. He could not deceive himself that he loved her. The agony in his chest was more intense and frenzied than any other time. When Wei Wei Bai heard his words, she immediately slapped his hand away. Your hand is covered in blood. Don't touch me. No trace of Snow's hand fell back to the ground. His fingertips were stained with blood, and he looked extremely pitiful. Wei Wei Bai reached out and put her hand under his armpit. Step by step, she dragged him towards the fire. She complained, Master, can't you eat less? It's been so tiring for me. No trace of Snow saw her and really dragged him to the furnace. The last glimmer of hope in his eyes disappeared. He knew the temperature of the furnace. It was a place where swords were forged. Once a person entered it, there would be nothing left of him. Wei Wei Bai pressed him to the side of the furnace. This furnace was huge. If a person fell in, there was no chance of survival. Behind him was the furnace, but Wei Wei Bai had no intention of stopping. She held his arm with one hand. Her eyes were cold and beautiful, and her smile was cruel and indifferent. Master, then I'll go find the next man. You can die in peace. I'll miss you. Her words were too perfunctory. She felt that he had already fallen in love with her. So he was too lazy to even pretend? No trace of Snow finally confirmed that there was really no trace of emotion in her eyes. His heart seemed to have disappeared. It was empty, and only pain filled this dark hole. Chapter 1351. His incomparably pale face barely managed to squeeze out a smile, but his heart was filled with unspeakable sadness. "Do you love me?" Even if it was just a perfunctory answer, it was fine as long as she said that she loved him. Wei Wei Bai's eyes slanted, full of charm, but her tone was incomparably indifferent. "If I say that I love you, do you believe me? I'm going to let you die with a clear understanding. Why don't you believe me? It's true that love can turn people into fools. These words are all true." No trace of snow looked at her for a while, and finally sighed, "Yes, I don't believe you." If she truly loved him, she wouldn't destroy his meridians. Moreover, it was so heavy that he couldn't recover. If she truly loved him, it was even more impossible that she didn't have any feelings for him in her eyes. She even wanted his life so straightforwardly. It was even more impossible that she would discuss looking for the next man in front of him. He really admitted defeat. This was the first time he had been played by a woman to this extent. Wei Wei Bai unhurriedly arranged a position for him. Then she smiled and said, "All right, master, let's meet again in the next life, okay? After all, a good man like you is rare. When I see you in the next life, I will lie to you again, and then personally push you into the fire pit." These words were abnormally innocent and cute, but also vicious and cruel. She even said in a relaxed tone, "After all, this kind of game is really fun." After saying this, she let go without hesitation. No trace of Snow's powerless body fell backwards, and behind him was the vigorous fire. The flames were fierce, and it was terrifying to the point of wanting to devour people. But his eyes were calm and deep, quietly looking at her like this. Wei Wei Bai heard the notification sound of the good feelings. "Ding, the male lead's good feelings are at 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission." "Ding, the heart is at 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the side mission." But these two notifications made Wei Wei Bai somewhat unable to react. Because blood had seeped through her clothes on her chest, and the tip of a sword had appeared on her chest. A long sword directly pierced through her chest from her back. Once again he killed her. No trace of Snow revealed a twisted smile. She had won the game, but she had still underestimated his strength. His inner strength had long broken through the restrictions of the medicine. Even if his hands and feet were crippled, he still had the strength to kill her who did not know any martial arts. Even if he died, he would not give her to anyone. She had provoked him, and now she wanted to escape unscathed? No trace of Snow fiercely fell into the furnace. His eyes were vicious and ferocious, but also carried a desperate love. Some games couldn't be played. Some people couldn't get his love. Otherwise, the price would be too high for her to bear. She was still too naive and too cute. She didn't know how scary it was to provoke a man who wanted to take her down with him. No trace of Snow laughed bitterly in the firelight. In the next life, they would meet again. Then he wouldn't give her any chance to escape. No trace of Snow's laughter suddenly disappeared. He slowly raised his hand. What was going on? In his chest, the emotional shackles were broken and disappeared. Although the temperature of the flames was high, that huge power surged out of his body and actually protected him. He could even clearly feel that the flaws in his martial arts had disappeared. The pain of being emotional was gone. No trace of Snow disappeared from the furnace. He rushed out of the furnace in the blink of an eye and picked her up. There was only one thought in his mind. She was the one who saved him. It was her. Wei Wei Bai powerlessly lowered her eyes. Lying in his arms, her breathing was so weak that it was almost inaudible. The system's warning sounded. "You must leave this world. Your body has suffered heavy injuries." The countdown begins in 60 seconds. Wei Wei Bai was already very familiar with this kind of situation. She vaguely saw no trace of Snow ask with a trembling voice, "Can you revive again? Wei Wei, what's the method to revive you? Tell me." This bastard deserved to be abused. He actually stabbed her once. This was the second time. The first time she was killed by a man twice. She reached out and grabbed his clothes. She forced a smile and said, "Master, you're fine." No trace of Snow's body stiffened. He looked at her in a daze. Her smile was soft and silly, but she liked him wholeheartedly. He choked up. His fingers helplessly touched her face. "How did you save me?" Wei Bai, as long as you love me, hate me to the extreme, and then have the intention to kill me, you can be saved. That was what the book said. So after she forced no trace of Snow's love out, she wanted to completely arouse his hatred. It wasn't the kind of hatred that was small and suspicious. It was a complete hatred that hated her to death. See, he didn't really hate her to death. She was really going to die. The Shui family's techniques were abnormal. To completely fill the flaws and avoid the deadlock, it required a cultivator to love and hate to the extreme. It was easy to love and hate, but no one could do it to the extreme. If it wasn't for her hard work, no trace of Snow wouldn't have been saved. No trace of Snow's face was frighteningly pale. His lips were stained with blood, making him miserable and painful. "You said you didn't love me. Were you lying to me?" Wei Bai stared at him blankly. Her smile disappeared. Her eyes were full of death. "Master, I don't love you." "How is that possible?" No trace of Snow looked at her, trembling. He watched as she tried to open her mouth to say something. He quickly lowered his head, but heard her lips close to his ear. Cold blood stained his ear. Her voice suddenly turned cold. It was so cold that it was emotionless. "Idiot, you were tricked by me again. Who loves you? It's just a game." After saying that, her breath disappeared. Her heart stopped beating. No trace of Snow hugged her. He kept his head down. He repeated in a low voice, "It's just a game." "Just a game? So, do you love me or not?" Chapter 1352. Do you love me or not? The man opened his eyes almost instantly. A trace of twisted pain appeared in his calm and cold eyes. He gasped for a moment, then reached out to cover his mouth. Too much pain caused his physiological reaction to become intense. He endured for a while before suppressing the throbbing pain in his heart and the uncontrollable trembling all over his body. Yi Yuxuan felt his breathing gradually calming down. His cold eyes also had a layer of moist light. It brought a trace of unexpected vulnerability to this man who had always been calm and indifferent. He blinked and turned to look at the person beside him. She was lying quietly on the long and narrow sofa. Her body was covered with a dark blanket. Her long hair was messy and scattered enchantingly on the sofa. Some of it even fell off the sofa. Yi Yuxuan looked at her quietly for a while. Then he slowly got up, bent down, and held her long hair that had fallen off the sofa and put it back on the sofa. Yi Yuxuan's fingers rubbed her beautiful and smooth hair. He squatted beside the sofa and looked at her quietly. 3 days. She should be waking up. Yi Yuxuan was calm, but he was looking forward to it. The only reason why he didn't collapse in the desperate dream was because she existed in reality. Yi Yuxuan's fingers slowly touched her red lips. Her condition was getting better and better recently. In the past, when she slept like this, even if she woke up, she would look very healthy. But when she slept, he could still see her weak side. At least her lips weren't as red as they were now. Because of malnutrition from sleeping for a long time, the color of her lips would be much lighter. But now, even if she was sleeping, he could still see her moist skin, her incomparably bright black hair, and her delicate and seductive red lips. She was like a real sleeping beauty. Yi Yuxuan couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her lips. Then he said in a low voice, "So to you, it's just a game?" Even if he had already guessed that she didn't have such deep feelings for him in the dream. But when she really said it, his heart still hurt for a while. Even now, he still hadn't recovered. In her dream, he had cut off all love. Before he died, he asked her if she really loved him. The man in his dream didn't know. But he knew very well that she might really see him as a game. Yi Yuxuan lowered her eyes. A trace of sadness appeared on her originally expressionless face, but it was quickly concealed. He knew that this emotion should not belong to him. It was him in her dreams. Yi Yuxuan had already started to work hard to get rid of the things in her dream. What he wanted was reality, the present, and her. Therefore, no matter how much pain and twisted love and hate the dream brought to him, he stubbornly maintained his original heart and did not vent any of his intense feelings of love and hate on her in reality. He would wait for her to fall in love with him. After all, a lifetime was a long time. Yi Yuxuan took a deep breath and digested the pain. This process was very difficult. However, it wasn't as if he had never encountered something more difficult, and he had never been flustered. Reason quickly took over, allowing him to slowly sort out all his emotions. Then he silently suppressed them. The intense pain in his dream was finally suppressed into the abyss of emotions, no longer showing for others to see. Then he opened his eyes again. His gaze was cold and calm. Wei Wei Bai was still asleep. She woke up a little later today. Chapter 1353. He did not disturb her. Instead, he sat quietly beside the sofa. They were now on his private plane. He had made an appointment with the fortune-teller. The plane soon arrived at the fortune-teller's city. Yi Yuxuan saw that her breathing was steady and did not change. He knew that she would not wake up so soon. He took a blanket and wrapped her tightly. Then he combed her messy long hair and braided it. He even pinned a beautiful and exquisite gemstone hairpin to her hair. Then he carried her and let her quiet and sweet face lean against his chest. He walked out, and an assistant immediately came over to open a black umbrella to cover them. The sun was dazzling. He was afraid that it would make her uncomfortable, so he used it to shade her. The extended black car drove over. The driver lowered his head and respectfully opened the door. Yi Yuxuan carried her into the car. He said expressionlessly, "We've arrived at the agreed location." The fortune-teller was in a bustling place in the city. It was different from the mystery of the fortune-teller. From afar, one could see the city center business district. A dazzling neon sign blinded people's eyes. Fortune-teller Shi knows astronomy and geography. He knows your wife's room number and your welfare lottery number. Yi Yuxuan. Then he calmly looked at the person in his arms. No matter how calm he was still uncomfortable with the light of the neon sign. It was the first time he saw neon signs that were brighter than the sun. Shi's fortune-teller shop was very luxurious and had good service. When Yi Yuxuan got out of the car, someone came to lead him in. Although the outside was fancy, the inside was surprisingly quiet. The decorations were Chinese. There were antiques on the flower and bird shelves. There were rosewood tables and chairs, as well as celadone tea sets. There were landscape paintings on the walls, and the floor was also made of wood. Yi Yuxuan looked down at the floor. The patterns on the floor were man-made, and they formed an inconspicuous Taiji symbol. Most people would not notice that there was such a symbol under their feet. Yi Yuxuan noticed it because he saw a faint white light on the Taiji diagram. He looked up again. The golden powder on Wei Wei Bai's head was still there. It fluttered in the air like golden dust. It was very beautiful to look at. When he first saw it, he thought it was sunlight. But now, he knew that these golden dots of light could not be touched. No one, including Wei Wei Bai, could see them. He was the only one who saw it. Just like now, when he saw the white light on the Taiji diagram beneath his feet. This world was getting stranger and stranger. Yi Yuxuan coldly and calmly thought about it for a few seconds before giving up. Because he had made an appointment in advance, he had booked an entire day. That was why this place was strangely quiet. The guide suddenly stopped and politely said to Yi Yuxuan, "My teacher is dealing with an hour. It will be done in 1 minute." Yi Yuxuan had already heard the conversation. "Do you know your wrongs?" A faint and distant voice sounded. It was said to be distant because the voice was too ethereal and had a distant effect. Another man's hoarse voice sounded. "Teacher, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done something that would harm my virtue for money. I don't blame you for doing things like cursing others for money. I'm just disappointed that you're short-sighted. You can sell your soul for such a small amount of money. It's a loss. Don't call me teacher in the future. You're just an intern. You're not qualified to be my disciple." Chapter 1354. The man immediately cried, "Master, I will definitely ask for more money next time. Don't chase me away." The faint voice sounded calmly, "Who said you will have a next time? Your curse will attract 10,000 ghosts. For a mere 1 million, you actually used your own life to curse. Stupid." The man was stunned. 10,000 ghosts? Master's book didn't mention it. Yushuan carried Wei Wei by and walked to the table unhurriedly. Then he sat down. Coincidentally, he could see the middle-aged man kneeling on the ground. In front of the man, a pair of feet wearing black cloth shoes was faintly discernible. The sitting man said, "Even if I tell you, you won't understand. Your talent is limited." The middle-aged man became hysterical. "Why? I don't have talent, but I have worked very hard. Who is more hardworking than me?" "I," the sitting man said indifferently. "What's the use of working hard? Scram." The middle-aged man immediately stopped when he heard the word scram. Then he struggled with all his might, but he was bound by an invisible force and was directly thrown out. Yushuan coldly reached out and covered Wei Wei Bai's ears so that she could sleep better. As for the man who was thrown out, he acted as if he didn't see him. Yushuan felt that he was used to seeing big scenes. Even if 10,000 ghosts really came, he wouldn't have any emotional fluctuations. After all, in the dream, he had been the Ghost King. The air was very quiet. Yushuan didn't say anything. He lowered his eyes and looked at Wei Wei Bai, paying attention to the rhythm of her breathing. After all, she would wake up today, but he didn't know how late it would be. The sitting man had already stood up. A pair of black cloth shoes stepped on the taiji pattern, and a white light wrapped around his feet. He walked out from behind the antique shelf, but stopped. Behind the sunglasses, his closed eyes opened. His black pupils were unfocused, but there was a trace of golden light. This light came from Yushuan. She quietly looked at Yushuan for a while before shifting his gaze to Wei Wei Bai. Yushuan turned to the side and blocked his line of sight. Then he turned his head and looked at Shi coldly. The fortune teller was younger than expected. He was wearing a traditional Chinese suit and a pair of round sunglasses. He looked exceptionally delicate and pretty. He said, "Honored guest, honored guest, honored guest." The 3 words "distinguished guest" were neither light nor heavy. "Yushuan, it is indeed very expensive." When he paid, although he didn't feel it, he was still clear about the size of the data. This blind man was much more expensive than some of his investment projects. She smiled. "There's a reason why it's expensive. The one who came to see your life is the girl in your arms, but her life isn't as expensive as yours." Yushuan didn't even blink. "It's fine. I'm all hers. It doesn't matter if she's expensive or not." Shi, who had been forced to eat dog food, smiled faintly. "All right, you can carry her in. I'll check her body." Yushuan followed his footsteps and walked behind the antique shelf. Although Shi was blind, he walked like a normal person. Behind the shelf, there was a table and chairs from the Qing dynasty. There was a recliner. Yushuan put Wei Wei Bai on it and pulled a blanket over her, covering her tightly. Shi had already rolled up his sleeves. His pair of sparkling jade-like hands were more beautiful than a woman's, but there was a different kind of strength that made his hands not soft at all. He said, "I can see her fate more clearly when I'm closer." Yushuan stood beside the recliner. "She will wake up in 3 days." The full article is at https://www. Sashu. Chapter 1355. Shi, let me see. Then he took off his sunglasses. Behind the sunglasses, his delicate features appeared. There was a red cinnabar mole between his eyebrows. It added a touch of amazement to his delicate and plain face. His black eyes were dark and dull, without a trace of focus. They were the eyes of a blind man. He reached out his hand and was about to touch Wei Wei Bai's face. A hand had already reached out and grabbed his wrist. Shi did not dodge and allowed Yushuan to grab him. "Mr. Yi, I need to come into contact with her to know more about her condition." Yushuan looked at him lightly, but his eyes were deep. "Where do you want to touch her?" Shi, who was full of survival instinct, immediately asked, "Where can I touch her?" Yi Yuxuan finally showed a hesitant expression. He was not allowed to touch anywhere. In the end, he still compromised. He let Ashi touch Wei Wei Bai's blanket and touch her hair for a while. Ashi actually wanted to touch Wei Wei Bai from head to toe and study her. But his strong premonition told him that Yi Yuxuan would chop his hands off if he did that. After seeing so many people's lives, Yi Yuxuan was definitely the most precious life he had ever seen. So precious that his eyes could not look directly at his life. On the contrary, he was not afraid of Wei Wei Bai. Ashi reached out his hand and a faint white light appeared on his sparkling fingertips. Only Yi Yuxuan could see it. It seemed that the money was well spent. This Ashi had some ability. Ashi's fingertips touched Wei Wei Bai's hair. He trembled and said in shock, "Where's her soul?" This girl's soul was gone. But her body was in such good condition. It was impossible. Yi Yuxuan was not surprised. He only focused on Wei Wei Bai and said calmly, "She woke up and her soul came back." He knew that it was not a dream. In that case, it could only be their souls that met. This was one of Yi Yuxuan's guesses, so he wasn't surprised that it was confirmed. Xia felt that his employer was really calm. He was much calmer than him. Blind continued to stroke her hair and began to trace the path of her soul as it disappeared, but he was looking for where she had disappeared to. His expression turned solemn. She has been sleeping for a long time because her soul has left her body. I need to summon her soul, lock it, and completely imprison her soul into this body. Only then can I fulfill your wish. Yi Yuxuan's request was for Wei Wei Bai to stay. Since Ashi had accepted this job, he would do everything in his power to complete it. He began to search for the whereabouts of Wei Wei Bai's soul. Her fate isn't good. I've divined 3 trigrams for her and all of them showed her to die young. She's weak and doesn't have good fortune. It's impossible for her to live a long life. This was a divination that he had used up all his abilities to calculate. To him, this divination was a disgrace. After all, he had spent so much effort only to calculate the most basic birth chart. He should have calculated her past, present, and future. When Yi Yuxuan heard his words, a trace of malice appeared in his calm eyes. It's impossible for her to live a long life, Ashi nodded. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly lowered his head and whispered, "Find her soul. Her soul is returning." Then Ashi said to Yi Yuxuan, "Hurry up and make a decision. Do you want to lock her soul in this body? As long as it's locked, her soul won't be able to leave." Yi Yuxuan saw that her eyelashes seemed to be starting to tremble. She was about to wake up. How long would it take for her to wake up this time? A minute? An hour? A day? Or, she didn't even want to stay for a second. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1356. Yi Yuxuan heard his own firm and cold voice ring out, "Soul lock." He wanted to keep her. Whether it was in his dream or in reality, he wanted to keep her. This obsession was like a chain that went deep into his bones, binding him. Ashi's expression was solemn. He spread out his fingers and suddenly took out a yellow talisman from his chest. Since the customer requested it, then soul lock. After that, Ashi's voice pierced through the air. Soul search, soul lock. There was no wind, but the talisman flew into the sky. Then, the talisman burned in the air. The flame was dazzling and ominous. The system had just put Wei Wei Bai's soul into its body. It saw Yi Yuxuan and was about to carefully shrink its body. Suddenly, it turned its head and saw white runes appear. They turned into sharp swords and stabbed into Wei Wei Bai's soul. The system widened its eyes. "Fuck you, what the hell?" These things were stabbing into Wei Wei Bai's soul to nail into its body. The system almost instinctively decided to block in front of Wei Wei Bai. Those sharp blades pierced into its body. Intense pain assaulted it. It gritted its teeth and looked at the blind man. These days, any Tom, Dick, and Harry dared to bully it. "Fuck you," it was scared of Yi Yuxuan. This passerby was blind. It raised its hand and a huge ball of fire appeared on its fingers. Ashi found it strange that its ability did not work. It could lock souls, but when it entered Wei Wei Bai's body, it did not make a single ripple. After seeing Wei Wei Bai, he was sure that Wei Wei Bai's physique and fate were very weak. It was something that he could easily solve. He could not see through her specific fate. It was covered by Yi Yuxuan. The powerful one was Yi Yuxuan, not her. A burning smell filled the air. She realized that it was a little hot. Yi Yuxuan calmly reminded, "You spontaneously combusted." Yes, he spontaneously combusted. The fire was fierce, and he had the ability to deal with it. He immediately pulled out a talisman. Extinguish the fire. The fire did not go out. Blind's face suddenly changed, the power in his body surged out crazily. Damn it, how could these flames be the golden flames of hell that could even burn away souls? What was even more frightening was that these flames came from Wei Wei Bai's counterattack. How was that possible? Her soul clearly didn't have any power. Such a weak soul actually had such a terrifying attack power. The system looked at Asya angrily. It floated on Wei Wei Bai's body, and a golden flame appeared on its fingertip from the red flames. He wanted to attack Wei Wei Bai's soul. It would return the favor and burn the other party's soul. In reality, it would be punished for attacking others, but today's attack had completely aroused its desire for revenge. No one was allowed to touch Wei Wei Bai's soul, yet someone dared to reach out and hurt her. Once the soul was injured, it was irreversible. Even if the punishment would hurt its vitality, it couldn't bear it anymore. So, die. The system looked at Blind coldly, and slowly raised its finger, intending to destroy the shrimp that hurt Wei Wei Bai. But in the next second, Blind seemed to have seen something. He said, "Golden flames, red flames. Mr. Yi, there's something incredible following this lady that you brought." After saying that, Blind turned around and walked out, his body covered in flames. His posture was graceful, and his clothes were burning fiercely, but his body was not burned. The system snorted at his back. If it wasn't afraid of being seen by Yi Yuxuan, it would have chased after him and killed him. Then it turned around, intending to wake Wei Wei Bai up and hide. Its back was suddenly poked by something. The system turned around in anger, only to see Yuxuan's indifferent and terrifying eyes staring at it. He raised his hand. Just now, his fingers touched its back. System. Yi Yuxuan looked at it indifferently for a while, then said, "You are..." The system's mind exploded. It was seen, it was seen, it was seen, it was seen, it was discovered. Yi Yuxuan's voice was as cold as ice, and his eyes were as cold as snow. "Are you a man or a woman?" System. Did this mean that if it was a man, he would kill it? / comma. Chapter 1357. In this world, only Yi Yuxuan could kill it. The system shuddered. "I'm neither male nor female." After that, the system rolled into the trash can with a whoosh. Then, it opened the system door and closed itself. Yi Yuxuan saw it. It was finished. Yi Yuxuan did not see anything specific. He only saw a round flame. He touched it, but it did not feel hot. Then, the flame disappeared into Wei Wei Bai's body. There was something that was neither male nor female hidden in her body. For the first time, Yi Yuxuan felt uncomfortable. No, not only was it uncomfortable, but a crazy and twisted jealousy appeared. Yi Yuxuan suddenly reached out and clutched his chest. He frowned, trying to suppress the painful emotions in his heart. His mind was actually a little chaotic. Too many worlds had left, and it made him feel fearful. Yi Yuxuan's breathing became heavier. He tried to control his breathing rhythm and let his abdomen breathe to control the rhythm of his muscles. He tried to relax himself so that he could sort out the fear. These fears, to be more accurate, should be called insecurity. Ever since he met her, he had experienced almost all the love, hate, resentment, and suffering. For him, it was almost impossible for him to feel insecure. He knew his advantage. He was very rational, so rational that it was scary. Even if emotions affected him, he could still rationally classify these emotions and organize them. Otherwise, with so many dreams, a normal person would go crazy after 3. Yi Yuxuan sat quietly, but his fingers were clenched tightly. And she, who was extinguishing the fire outside, realized that it could not be extinguished. He used the ancestors' holy talisman, holy sword, holy XXXXX. It still could not be extinguished. If this continued, it would burn to death. This transaction was a bit of a loss. He had to raise the price. Ashi sat in the fire and thought for a while. More than half of his hair was burned. He finally used his ultimate move. He rolled on the ground twice, thrice, 4 times, his body rolled on the ground. The light of the Tai Chi pattern wrapped around the flames on his body. The white energy surged and finally extinguished the fire on his body. That's why the firefighter was right. Remember to roll on the ground when your body is on fire. That would put out the fire. Ashi had just pulled the bed curtain to wrap around his body and was about to go in to see his employer. He hadn't even taken 2 steps when a blazing golden light appeared in his wooden eyes. A trace of fear flashed through Ashi's unfocused eyes. Yushuan lost control of her emotions? Blind sensed that the Taiji diagram left behind by the founder on the floor was beginning to move. This was a fluctuation that would only occur when encountering a powerful enemy. This was much more powerful than the golden flames from before. Asya felt that he really had to raise the price and raise it fiercely. He immediately rushed in. In the darkness, he saw a huge river of light surging towards him. The terrifying power was like a mountain range, like heaven and earth, infinite and boundless. Gold, a boundless gold. If one were to say that the golden flame was a terrifying weapon that could burn the soul, then the golden flame was a terrifying weapon that could burn the soul. At that moment, the golden light that he saw could easily reduce the golden flames that were burning him to a drop in the ocean. Yi Yushuan's life was indeed expensive. It was more expensive than a person on earth. Ashi felt that his heavenly eye was going blind. He hurriedly rushed over and gently threw a heart-cleansing talisman on Yi Yushuan's body. As soon as the heart-cleansing talisman touched Yi Yushuan, it burned like an explosion and immediately turned to ashes. Quick at the quick at / quick at the download quick at the quick. Chapter 1358. When he said this, his body trembled for a moment, but he quickly suppressed it. His black hair covered his eyes, and his face couldn't be seen. Only his voice was extremely soft, but it was filled with real guilt. I didn't control myself well. It won't happen again. He let himself lose control of his emotions. He lost his usual precise calculations, and his rationality couldn't be used. He was actually tempted by the dark and scary persistence in his heart. He only wanted to keep her. But he forgot that she might need to rely on her soul to leave her body, to live. Everything was just a guess. Yi Yushuan wasn't sure if she really needed his love to live. He also wasn't sure if he would hurt her after her soul was locked. But what if he did? Even if there was a 1 in a million chance that she wouldn't be able to live because her soul couldn't leave her body. He shouldn't have taken the risk. He shouldn't have. In the depths of Yi Yushuan's throat, there was a choking feeling that came from surviving a calamity. This was the first time his emotions had been controlled to this extent. Love was accompanied by resentment, and resentment was mixed with paranoid possessiveness. When he was on the plane, he had actually lost control, but he didn't realize it at that time. Yi Yushuan suddenly felt her hand on his back. Her hand patted his back. Then she asked in a puzzled voice, "Yi Yushuan, what's wrong with you?" Why did she look like the sky was falling? Yi Yushuan was silent for a few seconds before saying in a muffled voice, "Nothing, I just want to hug you." Hug her again. Because he didn't know when she would leave again. Just like in a dream, she had left too many times. He was actually in pain. Next chapter of Master's Little Witch. No trace of snow saw the Chinese roses outside the window bloom again. The beautiful flowers made him dazed for a moment. He thought he saw her leaning against the window with a sweet smile, calling him master casually. She didn't mean any respect at all. Instead, it seduced him. It was so pleasant to hear, like the sound of the bells on her ankles. Today was the 3rd month since her death. She lay in the ice coffin. Her body did not rot, but she did not wake up either. She was not a real monster. This time she was really dead. There was no miracle of resurrection, and there was no saintess in the devil cult that could bring a person back to life. Therefore, he still didn't know what method she used to resurrect the first time. Or perhaps he knew that the Wei Bai at that time might have been faking her death, so she came back to life. But this time, she was truly dead, unable to come back to life. No trace of snow lifted his wrist. The wound on his wrist was still there. The meridians in his 4 limbs were broken. Even though he had broken through the final hurdle of this martial art, his martial arts were still terrifyingly high even when his meridians were broken. But a wound was a wound. Broken meridians could not be perfectly healed, and would always leave behind scars that could not be erased. Love and hate had reached the pinnacle, and he had killed the person he loved with his own hands. No trace of snow sat quietly in the chair, looking at the world outside the window with an expressionless face. His eyes were filled with desolate calmness. He sneered softly, "Wei Bai, did you think that after you died I would die for you?" He would not let her succeed again. She was the one who said she loved him, and she was the one who said she did not love him. She was the one who said she was sincere, and she was the one who said she was playing a game. He was in her hands, firmly grasped and controlled by her wills. No trace of snow seemed to have made up his mind, but also seemed to want to hide something. He said softly to himself, "No, I will not love you again. No matter how much you control me, I will not hate you, and I will not be curious whether you love me or not." Chapter 1359. He was not that stupid. He would not struggle for an answer that he would never know for a lifetime. He would not. No trace of snow waited for a year, but the ice coffin could not preserve Wei Bai's body well. He set her body on fire. In the light of the fire, his face was extremely calm, and also incomparably empty. No trace of Snow's martial arts became stronger and stronger. In the end, there were not many martial arts masters in the world who could last one round against him. In the end, he became a legend in the martial arts world. But he did not play games anymore. He found that he did not play anything. His emotions did not fluctuate. His heart was like a dry well. Nothing could cause a ripple in him. He did not even have any desire. It was simply terrifying. No, he did not even have the feeling of being terrifying. Only the dead could understand his feelings. After no trace of snow killed another master who came to challenge him, he stepped on the blood and corpses and went up the cliff. Holding a pot of wine, he sat and watched the sunset. When the wine passed through his throat, he suddenly sneered, "Who is it? Come out and die." In fact, it did not matter. Those who followed him just wanted to kill him to gain fame. His status had been getting higher and higher over the years. It was much higher than when he was the Wolin Alliance. Everyone knew that as long as they did not die, they could gain great fame. They did not even need to defeat him. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a bell. He was startled and his heart beat wildly. All the numb emotions seemed to explode, pulling him out of the state of a dead person. His lips trembled. Even his mind was not clear. She was back. No trace of Snow's tears almost rolled out of his eyes. It was good that she was back. He did not even dare to look back. He was afraid that she would hate him and he would kill her. She was so arrogant and vengeful. After she came back to life, she would definitely hate him to death. He could even prepare a washboard and kneel when she asked him to. After she died, the room was full of books. The ancient book that could save him was also casually placed on the table. There were no markings on it. There was not even a highlighted place. However, he knew that she must have read it many times. Even the corners of the pages were badly worn. He couldn't imagine why she would flip through that book so many times if she didn't love him. The sound of the bell was getting closer and closer. Step by step, it was coming towards him. No trace of Snow heard the sound of a sharp blade piercing through the air. If she came back, he would rather sit and let her kill him. Unfortunately, it wasn't her. He pulled out his sword. The white blade was sharp and flashed with light. He didn't turn around, nor did he move his body. With his back facing the attacker, he struck out with his sword, and the attacker was already dead. No trace of Snow's expression was indifferent. There were traces of tears at the corners of his eyes. He raised his hand and took a sip of wine. The strong wine burned his throat. Behind him, a woman with a bell tied to her waist and a blade in her hand had her throat slit. She lay on the ground, bleeding profusely. No trace of snow felt a dull pain in his wrist. He lowered his head and looked at the wound on his wrist. It was painful on rainy days. There should be a heavy rainstorm tomorrow, so the air was moist. His wound was starting to hurt. Just like her, she would hurt him from time to time. When the pain seeped into his bones, he didn't feel much pain, because he was used to it. After he cried, his eyes were terrifyingly cold. He lied to himself many times. Even after burning the corpse, he still desperately hoped that she would suddenly appear, just like in the past. This kind of foolish hope was so bitter that he couldn't swallow it. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.